Okay, I think we're close enough. It's my pleasure to call to order the 30th meeting of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission on October 9, 2012. The first item of business is the minutes from the September 25th meeting, which I guess was, 2 weeks ago. Commissioner McHugh, do you have anything to say about those?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
They're self-explanatory.
In some detail.
One would hope.
Right. Anybody have comments? Looks fine to me, too. You want to move their acceptance?
All right, I move then that the minutes of the September 25, 2012 meeting be accepted in the form in which they presently exist.
Second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Ayes have it. Okay. Project work plan. Consultant status report. Are we, yeah. Yes, please. Introduce yourself to the assembled thousands.
Sure.
Millions.
My name is Kristen Gooch. I am with the project manager for the gaming consultants, and I'm here to provide an update on our progress over the last few weeks. So since the last update, which I believe was 2 weeks ago, the consultants and the gaming commissioners attended the Global Gaming Exposition in Las Vegas. And the consultants had an opportunity to assist the commissioners in developing initial contacts with regulators in several gaming jurisdictions and facilitated introductions to several gaming industry leaders. The event also provided the opportunity for introduction into gaming industry, new products, new slot machine accountability systems, new technology, advancements in gaming and surveillance equipment, and hopefully was helpful for you guys that attended. The consultants have also made significant progress on the evolution of the strategic plan. They worked to ensure that the plan addressed the questions that the Commission posed during this meeting 2 weeks ago.
25th, yeah.
And they're also working hard to make sure that the timelines that we've talked about are reflected and achievable in the strategic plan. The next draft of the plan we expect to be delivered at the end of this week or early next week. And some areas that they've really been focusing attention on include the table of organization, where they're expanding it to include individuals and groups mentioned in the statute, as well as decisions that the Commission has made around staffing. And they're also focusing on logistical planning to address the Commission duties and responsibilities regarding the pending Commonwealth Tribal Compact with the Mashpee Tribe. They're incorporating areas where legislative re-examination or potential action should be considered. And Phase 2 regulations, they're prioritizing policy decisions and regulations that are necessary for Category 2.
Say that again?
So for the Phase 2 regulations that are part of, that are incorporated into the plan, they're working on structuring that and prioritizing them in a way that reflects the regulations needed for Category 2 licenses, as well as for the local community agreements and developer
Was this the
needs.
point about separating out those things that need to get done
Exactly.
ASAP as opposed to the long-term regulations that won't really come into effect until they begin, the facilities begin?
Exactly, yeah, as
okay.
we talked about how to prioritize in a way so that we
Yeah,
can
okay.
potentially speed up Category 2.
Good, great.
Exactly, yeah. And get information to the developers,
Right.
local communities. So the team has also been reviewing and addressing comments and recommending actions for the Phase 1 application forms with Commissioner McHugh. And they are continuing to move forward with activities that are part of the next phase of consulting, including developing a work plan for evaluating completed applications or for evaluating completed applications and for facilitating the investigations phase. And also, excuse me, preparing for Phase 2 regulations with some research, and then obviously the policy decisions and the structuring of the order in which they're addressed.
Was that last point thinking about the resources necessary to review the RFA 2? What was that point about?
So they're just working on a work plan, basically what happens when applications start arriving. So what needs to be done to assess
Okay,
completeness.
RFA ones start to arrive.
Yeah, sorry.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and then the
Right.
Phase 2 regulations is just
Right.
the process that we had kind of talked about in terms of going through the policy decisions that need to be made. They're just starting to think about that
Right.
and about the research that's needed
Right.
around that. It's essentially planning for the next phase.
Right, okay.
Okay. Any-
There was another issue that you might have mentioned, but we talked about the scaling up of the staff and the potential, and the related budget didn't really reflect when the various facilities would come on board. Like if we were waiting longer, if there's only 3, not 2.
Yeah.
You know, if the slots comes
Yeah.
first, you know, I think they're aware of that, but that was just something that wasn't addressed, and we need to figure out, what, all the budget and staffing was aimed at a full operation for 4 facilities, which we may or may not have, and we need to, at one time, and we need to be able to figure out how to, you get the idea.
Sure, yeah, there were a number of things that I think came out of the discussion that we have that are all being addressed, but I'll double check to make sure that the
Okay.
budgeting around the timing
Okay.
of the license awards is reflected.
Any other reactions or questions or thoughts about that? Just one, excuse me. Oh, I was just going to, it was a different, I was going to change the subject a little bit, so.
We didn't talk about this last time, but in terms of the sequencing of regulations and other activities that are going on, is this plan going to contain some outline for the staffing that we need at that time? Because the sequential buildup of staffing, I think we've got it right. We have that list of critical hires. We also have some projections as to people who we'll ultimately need for a steady state operation. And maybe there's no difference. But if, for example, we did a slots parlor first, would we need X number of people when? Will this?
That's what I was asking
Yeah, I
about.
think
I'm
that was
sorry.
the same point. We did talk a bit about the need to incorporate that in the
Okay,
last time,
all
just
right,
around staffing,
all right.
around the timing of different,
Right.
Okay.
yeah.
Because for one thing, whoever has the current licensees will be the only people we can assess for our costs. And we don't want to get exaggerated
Right,
costs way
right,
beyond.
Right.
Okay, any other thoughts or questions?
Just a very brief update. From last meeting, I was delegated the task of negotiating and completing a contract for the extension of, with the consultants. That's not quite yet completed, but hopefully we will report next week with an update on that. Because we're in agreement on the terms. We just need to go ahead and execute, the documentation.
Great. Just one thing about, you talked about the conference in Las Vegas, and the 3 of us who were there have done some submitting of reports, and there was a wealth of stuff that we all came away with, as you mentioned. But 2 that might be worth mentioning in the public environment were, one, a much, I think, expanded understanding of the status of the land and trust issue. And we came away with an appreciation that there's a big movement afoot for a so-called Carcieri fix, which would fix the Carcieri Supreme Court decision legislatively and enable the land and trust process to proceed for tribes like the Mashpee Wampanoags with less complications. And there is also a fair amount of conversation about one-offs that can solve one tribe problem legislatively if they can't get an overall fix. But for what it's worth, there was a fair amount of optimism that could happen fairly soon, which is a little different than we had been kind of thinking ourselves, although we haven't really focused on this very much. And there was a lot of, they were very clear that the Obama administration has been very supportive. There have been a lot of land and trust decisions made even since Carcieri by the Department of the Interior. So that was one thing that affected our thought process. The other one was just the imminence of the iGaming stuff. We've all, in Massachusetts, I know the treasurer has a task force that's been looking at this, and we have realized it's kind of in the offing. But where you're in an environment like that, you see that internet gaming, whether it's sports betting or online poker or a whole array of online resources, is right on the top of the industry's plan. And Nevada has already adopted regs. New Jersey is close, right. And again, there's a lot of talk about what's going to happen at the federal level. There's a lot of pressure at the federal level to come up with a solution. And so I think, again, those of us who were there came back with a much heightened sensitivity that we really need to be aware of what's going on here and begin to understand what the consequences will be for our licensees, and be in collaboration ultimately with our licensees to maximize everybody's return, and so on and so forth. So we're certainly going to also, I think, ramp up our involvement a little bit in the Treasurer's task force, because I think I don't know what they are thinking. Are they aware of is the task force aware of all this? So it was more we who were not really aware of it.
Well, to a certain degree, I don't know that, one key takeaway from me relative to online product was that poker seems to be at the forefront, online poker,
right,
at the forefront of all these products. So the Treasurer's Office is quite aware of the online in general, the online world, and we are treating everything as products, online products, because poker could be followed by lottery, et cetera, et cetera. But from my perspective, I took away that there's a very strong market for online poker.
Yeah, right.
And that is of particular concern to this commission, especially as we have this very nascent industry here in
Right.
Massachusetts.
Right. And I certainly think that, from my experience in talking to the legislature, that they're not very aware. Maybe the people on the task force are aware, but I don't think that other people that we've talked to have any particular sense that this is really coming quickly around us. So anyway, that was just really useful. So there was a lot of stuff that came, a lot of learning that came out of that trip. Anything else for our consultant? Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you, Chris.
3B is this out-of-sequence policy decisions. We've kind of talked about this. Actually, I should have mentioned this to you. I think we did mention this. The idea that there are a bunch of policy decisions, likely to be policy decisions about criteria, for example, that we will be considering seriously, that the sooner we can get these kinds of discussions out on the table. It's a little bit different from the regs. We also are going to try to pull back regs that need to be done earlier. But where there are policy decisions, like how much are we going to value sustainability and what does that mean, or whatever, are issues that we're going to try to pull forward and come up with a list of stuff that we can deal with to expedite so that the bidders are aware of some of these major policy issues as early as possible in the process, even before the RFA 1's background check process is completed. So that's something that we would want help from your team as well, but also that we need to think about. I think we need to think of some way to try to be a little bit systematic about this, and I've got a list that I kind of been keeping on the side. Maybe I'll circulate that at some point and we can chip in. Have you had any other thoughts on that, Commissioner, that you want to?
No, but I think it's an essential thing to do. We've talked about that before.
A number of times,
and I'm in the process of trying to go through the statute again to isolate some areas where I think that we need to make those decisions. The consultants have a list of them, and I think we need to develop a list, prioritize it, and do just that.
Yeah. Okay, we'll try to move on that in the next week. Phase 1 regulations, Commissioner McHugh.
Okay, we have, as you all know, a set of, well, let me begin by saying that this Friday, This coming Friday, our Phase 1 regulations will be published by the Secretary of State and will be effective on publication. That's on schedule as we planned back in June. We also planned that in the middle of next week, we would actually issue the RFA1 applications and begin, therefore, to allow folks to begin filling them out and returning them to us. We posted for public comment, although we were not required to do so, the forms for the applications. And we received a number of comments on those forms. And I sent the comments to all of you. You have them in the meeting packet today. All of the comments that we received are there. I sent them to the consultants, and I also reviewed them and with an eye toward making some recommendations as to what to accept and what not to accept with respect to the comments. There is no real easy way to do this except by going through them to the extent you'd like to talk about them, but we can talk about them globally. In the main, the comments would require, if accepted, changes to the specimen form that we're going to publish on the website that will indicate to all bidders the things that we presumptively are going to consider confidential and the things that we're not. In other words,
Was that the gist of this one too? Same basic gist?
Yes, that's
Okay.
the gist of all three comments. Primarily focuses on that specimen form. There are some places where changes in the text of the forms will be necessary. But the main thrust is, what do we consider confidential, what do we not consider confidential? And that will be reflected in the specimen form. The other forms will be on the website for people to download, fill out, and return electronically. So with that as a prologue, let me begin with the instructions that will accompany the forms. The instructions, we approved the draft instructions that we posted. There are two areas that we need to think about changing. Those are highlighted in yellow on the form that was distributed as part of the meeting packet. The most important of those, and perhaps the most important issue we have to decide today with respect to all of this, is the deadline for the Phase 1 applications. This form in draft says November 30th. The plan that we received from the consultants talks about the end of the year, I believe. We need to decide what the deadline's going to be so that the instructions that we actually post next Wednesday will reflect that accurate date. And so that's the first thing I'd like to take up. And as I say, it's the most important of the things we have to decide today.
I have a question for clarification or for better understanding. The idea in originally was on December 31st was to allow enough time for the respondents to fill out these forms, which
Right.
can be lengthy and whatnot. But is now the idea that given that these forms have been available publicly, and there's been quite a bit of discussion relative to what and will be and will not be confidential, et cetera, including the other forms that we're using, the multi-jurisdictional form, that we could bring that date back a little bit?
No, frankly, Commissioner, the November 30th date was put into these draft instructions as a sort of stalking horse as they were being prepared. It was not intended to be the final date, and I don't think we gave it significant consideration when we put it in. We had to have a date. We didn't have this plan from the consultants. We didn't have the PMA project plan. We didn't have a lineup of things to go, and November 30th would only be 6 weeks after we publish the application in its final form, and personally, I think that's too short a time. So I think that the project plan is much closer to the mark as to the deadline we should have, which would be the end of the year.
As I've been talking about it, around the state, I've been saying basically 3 months or 90 days, and which I thought we had all kind of said, at least kind of informally. So that would make it, if we release these, what's Monday,
We're not going to release them Monday,
No,
they'd
but
be Wednesday.
is that the
It's the 15th, I believe.
15th? So it would be basically the 15th of January.
January would be 90 days.
Right. The issue, so there's two issues to me. First of all of the bidders, many of whom are in the room and watching, are anxious to move the process along.
Right.
And everybody knows that the sooner they get the forms in, the sooner we can start the investigation. So no matter what date we put, I'm sure people will be bringing them in as quickly as they possibly can. And I would encourage everybody to do that. As you've seen from the progress, everybody knows, but as you've seen from our chart, one of the ways we can pick up material time is to have the forms come in, or the completed forms come in earlier on all the negotiated qualifiers, which we'll talk about in a sec. But also, it does seem to me that there ought to be some kind of a reasonable extension process, so that if for some reason debating about qualifiers, new people who have never done this before, whatever, that people can extend under reasonable conditions. And I don't know that we've ever really.
Well, that would be the second, I
sorry.
agree with you, Mr. Chairman, that would be the second yellow line, talks about waivers, and how one goes about waivers, and basically ties a request for waivers into the existing regulations. Actually, that just deals with waivers on the disclosure, but all waivers, that should be broadened to include all waivers, including waivers of deadlines for filing the application.
Okay. Well,
That was the intent, so I should.
So we wait till we get to that one? Okay.
We could talk about it in the same context.
Okay.
but-
Well, I haven't, as I said, I haven't really thought about this. It just seems to me we don't want to arbitrarily cut people off. We know this is complicated. We know in Ohio, there were extended debates about who was going to be a qualifier and who was not. So I think it's in our interest to have some kind of a reasonable extension/waiver process. That's all.
Well, in that context, I would be in favor of the later date, the December 31st. Is it December 31st?
Well, I said
January 15 would be
90 days, yeah.
90 days, to allow the flexibility, because there's the scope of licensing conversations that we have talked about as to who may or may not be a qualifier is incorporated in that project plan originally.
So if we picking up, if we did that, picking up on the chairman's point, if we did that and said that waivers of not only our confidentiality rules, but of deadlines and any other aspect of the proceedings would be governed by our general waiver provisions of the regulations, we would solve both issues.
So what would
And
that?
the waiver regulations basically set out in detail the need to make a showing of cause as to why you should be given a waiver of the deadline. In other words, it's not, somebody can't come in and say,
Right.
I want an
So
extension.
specifically, how would that work? If you just walk me through how that would exactly work.
Somebody would say somebody wants to file an application. They have these discussions about qualifiers that we're going to provide for. They don't reach some conclusion as to who's going to be a qualifier and who isn't. They then request a waiver of the deadline to the extent that it's necessary to, file a supplemental application with the additional qualifiers if we conclude that certain people need to qualify, and those are the people we've been talking about.
But so the regs would say that they would have to submit a written something or other
Written
to
request
us,
for
to the commission, in time for us to get us on one of our public meetings.
Right, and then we would say, we would allow or disallow the extension of the deadline.
Okay. And we could waive it in whole or in part, depending on what their request was.
Right.
Maybe they want to do some of it, maybe they want to do pieces of it.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, the range of reasons is almost infinite.
Right.
With people who are debating with us about who needs to be a qualifier, for example, we could say file as to
Everything
everybody
else,
we
right.
agree, so we
Right.
can get started. And we'll give you a waiver as to others, and we'll continue to work with you to decide whether they have to be qualifiers as well, and set some deadline for doing that. If somebody hypothetically said that they were having difficulties of some other kind, the computer system blew up and erased all their data, and they needed a couple of extra weeks to put it all back together again. I mean, that's another reason to
Right.
grant a waiver. But so that this would take care of everything.
There's a couple chairs here. Okay.
Irrespective of the waiver provision, which I think is important, and I think it's valuable to include not just for the confidentiality of certain information. We have, and will be receiving soon, October 12th, responses from potential financial advisors. And that process, the genesis of that was this idea of talking or surveying, talking to or surveying equity investors who may or may not be engaged in or contemplating Massachusetts at this point.
That was one of the ideas.
That was one of the ideas. And because we have that parallel track, if you will, I would, again, advocate for the later date, January 15th, to allow for a potential survey that we conduct or whatever we may do to help us vet the notion that whoever is out there that wants to engage in Massachusetts is already engaged or not.
Right, I don't think there's any resistance to the January 15th idea. I mean, so the sooner they can come in, the better. That doesn't limit anybody.
Doesn't
I
eliminate.
think
And
it's the
they're-
best practice in the industry.
90 days?
Consultants are telling us 90 days is
Yeah.
what's somewhat
Right.
standard, so
Right.
that makes sense.
Right, and I'm just not familiar, I'm totally comfortable with using that clause, except that I'm not familiar with what it says. And if you are, which you are, and it's a simple, straightforward process, as you just described, then I think that'd be fine. As long as people know they have that.
Right. So we'll put that in the regulations, we'll put that in the instructions, I mean, as well.
Right, okay.
And those regulations, of course, will all be posted and available as of Friday, and this will not be published till next Wednesday, and everybody will know.
Right. And so that would mean if you get an extension, that would also extend the period, the date at which you would be required to submit your 400,000, right? Because your 400,000 has to come in finally with your completed RFA 1?
Well, I'm not sure that it has to be, the 400,000 has to be paid no later than the date you submit your application. Whether, take again the example of the debate over who's going to be a qualifier. We might say, in granting the application, that your $400,000 and so much of the application as we agree that you're going to need to file is due on January 15th, and the balance we'll set another deadline for. So we could do that and require that the 400,000 be submitted when the bulk of the application was submitted, so that we can start the investigation.
That's key.
As of that piece. We might want to do that. Somebody who we said, because the computer blew up, and you have to reassemble the data, you don't have to file your application for another 3 weeks. We don't have any investigation to do, so we might say at that one, and your $400,000 is due at the end of the 3 weeks. In other words, flexibility here is, I think, the key. And we can do whatever is fair under the circumstances, but there's no inexorable link between the waiver and the deadline for paying the money.
So if somebody, let's say there's a debate about qualifiers, if somebody wants to get an extension, wants to get a waiver / extension, they would then say, they would say either we're going to submit our 400,000 anyway because we'll resolve this at some point and we're going to go forward, or they might say to us in their application to us, we want the application if we can't resolve the qualifier, it could possibly be a deal breaker for us, so we don't want to put our 400,000 down, and we would have the right to consider that and grant it if we thought it was reasonable.
Or deny it. if we
Or
thought
deny
was
it, right, either way, right,
Right.
right.
I guess what, yes, and I guess what I'm stressing here is that once we're in the area of waiver, we have the opportunity to shape the conditions of the waiver in any way that we want, having in mind that we'll act in a way that we think is fair, both to the public
Right.
and to us and to the applicant.
So forgive me if this is obvious, but just apropos of the point that Commissioner Zuniga was making, if somebody comes late to the game in January, February, somebody says, you know what, I want to get into this game, and I've got a site, and I want to do this. I want to fill out an RFA. Do we have it within our reasonable discretion under the clause you're referring to do that?
We have the right to, the power to waive any deadline for anything. We have the power to waive any provision of any regulation under the as long as the 4 criteria set out in that regulation are met. Whether we would do that for those reasons.
Right.
I would prefer not to speculate.
No, I understand that, but I'm just saying.
We have the power to do
We would
anything.
have the power.
That's
And the
right.
4 criteria are what?
Well, I can't tell you
Okay.
exactly, but they
they're-
add up to a showing of good cause. This is more than I overslept Saturday, right?
The dog ate my
Right.
homework, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I'll state an obvious point, but we could find that we don't find reasonable the amount of proposals submitted, let's say, and we could reopen,
back
just
up
like
again.
any other
Right.
solicitation,
Okay.
we could reopen it, extend it,
Okay.
et cetera.
Okay, good. Well, because what I think we should try to be sure we're finding is something that expedites the process as much as possible, particularly for those who are interested in moving quickly. B, gives us the broadest flexibility possible to get the most competition and the best possible deal for the Commonwealth. And C, that we're fair to the people who are bidding and the communities they're bidding with. And so those 3 things. But it sounds like with that pretty broad clause, that we can accomplish, we will have the tools to accomplish that balancing act on any issue that comes up to us.
Yeah, I'm confident that we will, Mr. Chairman, and the consultants have suggested that the main place where we may have to exercise these waiver provisions has to do with the identity of qualifiers.
Right.
And associated questions. So there, I think we just need to be prepared for that and deal with it in as expeditious a manner as we can.
Right, okay. Well, that sounds good to me as a solution. So we would go January 15th as the formal deadline with the waiver process, extension process that we've discussed, which would apply to this as well as to everything else, and which people will now see thoroughly discussed on our website and
Right.
transcript and so forth. Okay, do you want to?
Yes, now, insofar as the 3 sets of requests for changes or alterations are concerned, I suppose the best way is to go through these quickly and pause for any questions that we want to discuss, remembering that these are going to be changes we make largely to the specimen form and not to the actual application form. I should say that I received this morning, and I'm very grateful for the quick turnaround that they made, recommendations from the consultants, both the legal and the gaming consultants, as to the changes suggested, and the thoughts that I had and my recommendations of theirs are in alignment with respect to all of this. So with that as a prologue, we'll deal first of all with the Mohegan Resorts request for changes. The changes requested in the second paragraph. Mohegan. Mohegan.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Fully hold.
Yeah. The changes requested in the second paragraph really aren't consistent in our view with the statute, which presumptively makes every aspect of the application public with some exceptions. So I think we've dealt with that, and the presumption is the opposite way. With respect to the changes recommended and requested in the fourth paragraph, we're all in agreement that those changes should be made. And they're basically designed to make confidential an individual's height, weight, and marital status. Marital status is, by statute, a confidential piece of personal information at the moment, and height and weight, I think, fall in that category as well. There's a request to make the names of individuals who apply for firearms licenses confidential, and there's a statute that does that, so we should do that as well. And insofar as personal information dealing with casino employees and other qualifiers, we think that the presumption should apply to them as well. It applies
Presumption
to
of
confidentiality.
Of confidentiality?
Confidentiality with respect to personal data
Okay,
affecting
fine,
those
okay.
people.
Okay.
So we recommend that change be made as well.
Okay.
Again, all three of those changes simply require a change to the specimen form, no change to the application form itself.
Did that, just for the heck of it, did that include house of worship or fraternal organizations?
Yes.
All those
that stuff,
recommendations? Okay.
That is personal,
Okay.
personal information, religious affiliation, that kind of thing.
Okay, great.
Then with respect to the MGM comments, they begin substantively on page 2 with the first full paragraph on page 2. The request there is that if the home address is the same as the mailing address, we should exempt the mailing address from publication, and that makes sense. We've exempted the home address now, but not the mailing address, but both are the same. We should exempt that. The next one deals with a matter that we've discussed several times and carefully thought through, and the recommendation is that we not accept that request for a change. That has to do with whether a tax return has ever been adjusted or audited, or if the applicant has ever failed to file a tax return. We went through that in some detail on that matrix that you saw the last time, and concluded that that should be public. The results not necessarily so, but the fact of an audit or adjustment or a failure to file should be, and so we recommend that that request not be taken, not be acted on favorably. And existing civil litigation, the claim there is we now are requesting the status of any civil litigation to which a applicant is a party, and the claim there is that is hugely burdensome, because there can be a claim for a refund on a hotel bill that led to litigation. There can be significant claims for coming out of some merger or acquisition, and the latter can be in the hundreds of thousands. The consultant, and it's a huge burden without any significant yield. The consultants have recommended, and I tend to agree with them, that we ought to leave it the way it is and make that part of the discussion with the applicant, and leave it to the applicant to disclose to us or tell us why it's going to be a burden to do that.
Which would then, in the same context, give us the right to waive this.
The right to waive it. There are two reasons for doing that. Number one, the gaming consultants in particular say that many of the corporations that are going to be the applicants have all this data computerized anyway, and can spit out a report. And secondly, if an entity has thousands and thousands of consumer lawsuits and complaints. That tells us something perhaps useful about the applicant. And just the volume as compared to another applicant. So it's a useful piece of information. Is it dispositive of anything? Not necessarily, but it's a useful piece of information to have. So the recommendation there is to leave it in the present form, but be prepared to discuss it in these initial discussions that we're going to have if somebody can show why it's both irrelevant and unduly burdensome. So that's the recommendation of that.
Great.
Now, the next one is the submission on behalf of Suffolk Downs, and that is extensive. So I'm just going to go through them quickly. The first is the business entity disclosure form. I hope everybody's had a chance to read these. The first paragraph, the recommendation is that we not make the requested change. The second, as to the second item, the recommendation is that we should make the requested change. Same is true of the third recommendation, that we should make it. The fourth recommendation is that we make the requested change. The gaming consultants, as to that one has to do with correspondence between the business entity and its consultants, its auditors, related to or dealing with the annual reports or other filings. The claim there is that correspondence is correspondence, and it may not yield anything of value. The consultant's position is that it may yield something of value, and that we should leave it the way it is, and again, talk through with the applicant if the information is unduly burdensome. So that's the recommendation that they've made, and that is that's the recommendation that I make as well.
So this would be a no.
So this would be a no, I'm sorry. That would be a no, but. And then the final one on that page would be a yes. As to the next one, which is the Massachusetts Personal History Disclosure Supplemental Form, the recommendations are as follows. As to the first one, yes. As to the second and third, no. As to the fourth, yes. As to the fifth, the recommendation is no. As to the next one, the recommendation is no, and as to the last one, the recommendation is no. The last one and the
Last one on page 2.
on page 2, right. The last one and the one 2 lines above, page 11, item 17, talk about repetition. The consultants, gaming consultants' view is that the repetition, because these things are going to be filled out necessarily by multiple people, is itself a valuable thing, so that we make sure we get the straight story. That's basically what the recommendation is. It's a small matter. It seems to me that the yield there is potentially valuable, and we ought to leave it the way it is.
Price is modest, yeah.
Right.
Page 10, item 15, I didn't hear what you said about.
The recommendation is that we make that change.
Yes, okay, on the motor vehicle.
Right.
Okay.
And then the final page, page 3, the recommendation for the first one is yes, and the recommendation for the rest is no.
Marital, did you say something earlier that it was confidential? Marital,
Yes, I was going to ask that question too.
page 8, item 4.
No, it is, there's a difference. This one has to, I'll go back and check, but this one has to do with information about the spouse's financial status as opposed purely to marital status. But let me go back and check to make it consistent. Marital status is exempt. We've said
Yes.
that we're going to change that in response to the first one. Let me go back and check
Okay.
that. And if it's simply marital status, they need to be consistent. But I think this one deals with assets and investments of the spouse rather than simply the existence of a spouse. I mean, one sort of requires the other, doesn't it? But that's what I think the difference between the two is.
Okay. Well, thank you to you and the consultants. That was yeoman work. That was a lot of work.
Well, it's unfortunately, there's no easy way to sort of talk about it. But, so we will make those recommendations, we will make those changes in the specimen form and in the few cases that are necessary in the forms itself. So I would move that I be empowered to work with Anderson and Krieger, who are doing the final preparation, to embody the substance of the recommendations just described in the revised specimen and specimen form and application forms, and publish on the 15th as scheduled the resulting forms.
Subject to that one.
Yes, subject to
that one clarification.
one clarification.
Do you want to add into this the closing date and waiver?
Yes, and that we publish with the forms the instructions containing a January 15, 2013 deadline for filing applications, and a provision that would allow waivers from that deadline under the terms and conditions set out in the regulations that will be published this Friday.
That was seconded.
Yeah, that was second.
Did we, as a practical matter, do we already have the right to have waived that? I mean, does the waiver clause that's referred here, 205 CMR 102.03, et cetera, does that already give us that right? So we're to waive anything we want? Is there
The
already?
regulations in, I believe it's 102.03 is the general waiver regulation.
But so we already really
And
have
that-
that in a way.
Well, yes, but we incorporate that in here so that there's no
Yeah.
mistake that that's,
Right.
those conditions have to be met in order for a waiver of the
Right.
deadline here.
Great.
So that combined motion has been seconded and is ready for discussion.
And the motion included any waivers, including like if we want people to come in late, not just the July 30 date, but and all the other kinds of things we talked about, we would be empowered to do that under your motion.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand that. The motion, the waiver of the deadline would be covered by 102.
But also the waiver of
0.03.
like when the 400,000 is due.
The waiver, yes, that would be covered by it. That regulation, 102.03, deals with waivers of any provision of our regulations. The provisions of the regulations cover all of these things.
Right, okay.
The form simply takes the regulation
Right.
and puts it in a form.
Right.
So to waive any provision of our
Right.
regulations
Right.
would.
So including the ones we've just got through saying that we would consider in a qualifier conversation.
Right.
We're already authorized to waive those as we've said we might.
Right.
Okay. Any other discussion about this fascinating topic? All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay?
Okay.
Nays have it. Great.
All right,
Work.
there's one more aspect of this before I let you all go.
Hey, we're having fun, don't worry.
And that is this. When the day before, or 2 days before, we filed the final regulations with the Secretary of State, we filed an amended, under your signature, under your signature, someplace your signature.
Over.
An amended small business impact statement. That's required as part of the regulation promulgation process. And that was drafted and filed, Mr. Chairman, on September 25, I believe. September 26 it was actually filed. And that is part of the meeting packet today with the date stamp on it. I would move that we ratify the chair's filing of that statement on September 26th. And adopt that statement as or ratify that that is the statement of the commission.
Second the motion?
Discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Now you're free to go.
Great. Well, on this topic, we had talked about being ready to schedule meetings with people who want to take an RFA 1 ASAP from the moment the forms are available. And we haven't really set that process up yet. I think it's a process that we expected to do in conjunction with the consultants, to have those meetings in conjunction with the consultants. I guess we have one more meeting, we have Tuesday, but just so bidders can start to plan, do we want to talk about how that process ought to work and when we would start that?
I think we need to talk about, I think we need to talk about both, but I think we need to determine promptly what we're going to do about the investigation piece, unless those discussions are within the existing contract with the gaming consultants or some subset of the gaming consultants, or the contract that can be extended. In other words, we have two pieces, at least, to the investigative process. We have the shaping piece, let's call it, where you have the discussions as to who's a qualifier and who isn't a qualifier, what documents, and some of the things that we just went through, and come to an agreement or a disagreement as to what has to be done. And then we have the execution of the investigation within those parameters. And I think those are divisible.
Right.
Ideally, they're done by the same people,
Right.
but they don't have to be. And so, but we have to figure out who's going to do them.
Right.
And that's really the important part of the conversation, I think.
Well, let me just quick jump in, because I think this is something we've been very much conscious of. In a perfect world, we would have the investigations people on board.
Right.
And the qualifier discussions would be the same, but that's never been feasible for us.
Right.
Under any scenario. So we have put into the phase 2 that we would be able to carry on the discussions about qualifiers, the preparation, the shaping, as you were saying, with our present consultants, and then pass the investigations themselves on, which, as you say, is a discrete piece to whoever becomes the investigations people.
Right.
And the driver on the investigations piece is that within 30 days or so, nobody expects we're going to get completed RFA 1s back before a month or so of the time we put them out, so that at worst, on or about November 15th, we will have the investigations decision in place and ready to go. So we are covered under the extension that we are presently negotiating with the contractor. Does that say that right?
I was gonna just say
Okay.
everything to that effect. The bulk of the current extension of the contract, which we are about to execute, is essentially two big pieces, one of which is the scope of licensing that we came to term.
Right.
All the initial prodding as to who may be a qualifier and who may not, and what the regulation intended, et cetera, et cetera. And the other piece is the phase 2 regulations, which again, is something that we know to start.
Right.
So it's anticipated that, just what you mentioned, these decoupling of the scope of licensing from the investigations.
Right. So then it really is it reduces itself to an administrative arrangement with the consultants as to the framework that the scoping discussions will take, and posting a notice as to that once it's done. We don't have to have a regulation, we just have to have a notice, and then individual discussions with applicants who are going to have that discussion.
Right, which I suppose maybe it's, if we're going to release the RFAs on Wednesday the 15th, then can we aim starting Monday to schedule the qualifier? I mean, theoretically, we could start Wednesday, but maybe that doesn't make sense, but we could, should we target Monday, whatever that would be, the 20th or whatever it is, to start the qualifier meetings?
Surely, provided that the
That's,
consultants
Kristen,
are
something we need to talk about, right?
ready to go.
Because that'll involve some of us as well. It won't be just the consultants. Can't-
Initially, I would think it would be the consultants, but it may involve us as well. This is not, at least as we've outlined it, this is not a mandatory part of the process. Somebody who wants to simply fill out the application and is happy to give all the information that's requested.
Right.
Doesn't have to go through this. But somebody who does have concerns about it needs to request it.
But ultimately, it will, yeah, well, we can talk more about the process, the extent to which we're involved. We heard quite a bit about it. The people in the audience will be pleased to know that we were on a panel that had Massachusetts and Ohio representatives, and the process here is expected to be much less easier than the process there, both with respect to Ohio, both with respect to confidentiality, flexibility, and the qualifier discussions. But we've now heard many, many times that the qualifier discussions are where these things get bogged down. And it went to like months sometimes in Ohio, many months. And it will ultimately come to us, and we need to think about whether we want, it would ordinarily just be our Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement. We don't have a Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement yet, bodies to do the work, which is fine. We've agreed that that's not necessary. We don't want to ramp up a huge bureau to do this and then lay them all off. So I guess if our bureau were doing this, we probably would not be involved unless there were an appeal to us. So maybe you're right and I'm wrong in that sort of instinct about how that works.
Well, it seems to me, first of all, we've agreed we don't want to have these investigations done by the
Right.
Bureau because they take a massive amount of effort that is a one-off. We'll never have to do this again. Unlikely we'll have to do this again. But the consultants certainly can have the initial conversations and then either include one of us or formulate problems that we as a commission have to resolve after they have that. So, but in any event, whether or not we're involved, the consultants are going to be the key members of the discussion from our side.
Right.
And so we really need to work out our schedule, work out the scheduling issues with them, and then post a notice or be prepared to promulgate reservations and things in light of their
Right.
schedule.
But we don't need to do to have those meetings, we don't have to do anything formal. It'll
No.
just be to make sure. So
Right.
it'll be on our website for if there's any questions. But Kristen, we should talk soon, like this week, to talk about making sure that whoever the consultant team is going to be is available starting a week from Monday. Or other, if that doesn't work. Okay, great, we're getting down to it. Anything else on Phase 1 regulations, et cetera? RFA ones? Okay, administration, we do have some progress, which we will hear about in a minute, on the personnel searches. We hope to be able to announce our ombudsman next week. And we are moving full bore on everything else we're doing, including the executive director. I think that's it. There's nothing new to start, no new searches to start, I guess. All right,
Not
okay.
yet.
The Director of Administration, Director Eileen Glovsky, is not here today, but Commissioner Zuniga had a couple of updates on her behalf, or
Sure,
his
there's,
behalf.
very briefly. I spoke about the final phase of execution of the extension of the current contract to our sets of consultants. We hope to have that ready within the next few days, and we've all agreed that these would be to include some of the tasks that they've already done on our behalf in this transition period, if you will. But we'll get that done and executed. Also, we will be putting out an RFP for stenographic services, and that will be forthcoming. We have a calendar for that, and we'll be issuing that in the next few days as well.
Okay. Do you know when we are going to get another round from for the project management chart from PNA? It's been 2 weeks since we had that last meeting. Do you happen to know?
I know we scheduled a conference call, Eileen and I, with them this Thursday.
Okay.
So we're hoping to have an update. There were a couple of follow-ups, questions since our last meeting 2 weeks ago. One of them was resource loading, certain of the activities they have to do with when we need certain staff
Right.
For certain activities,
Which
and
is
they're working
part
on
of
that.
what we've also asked the consultant to figure
That's
out.
right. That's right, but they need to reflect that, and there's
Right.
been some initial discussions as to just how to go about doing that efficiently, as well as the tribal timeline. You had talked, Mr. Chairman, about potentially talking to the tribe and having an introductory discussion, perhaps yourself with them. If there's a timing component, that's something that we really would like to start understanding from
Yeah.
a scheduling standpoint.
Right. Okay.
Those were the-
I should mention that we did meet the chairman of the tribe, Cedric Cromwell, and 2 or 3 other members of the tribe, and I met with the acting chair of the Tribal Gaming Commission and the acting executive director of the Tribal Gaming Commission, and we're going to follow up on all those. But we met them in Las Vegas, and it was a very positive meeting with the people from the Tribal Gaming Commission, suggesting to me that is on first blush, that looks like a good working relationship. But we could follow that up. But I think we ought to try to see if we could have them on the agenda for next week, because it must be awfully close to having it be a working document by now.
You mean PMA?
PMA, yeah, right. I mean, there'll always be changes, it's a living document, but
It is.
I'd like to get it moving for us, get it working for us if we can.
There's 2 other aspects that they're also following up on that, and we can certainly follow up next week. But that's the list of MOUs that the commission needs to start working on that may have an impact again on our critical path, if you will.
Right.
As well as the phase 2 discussion as to whether we can or want to split into the slots part of the license
Right.
versus all of them at the same time.
Right.
So they're
Right.
creating that split analysis or.
Right, okay.
for us.
Well, there's other stuff that they're waiting on us, I mean, the research timeline, they're waiting on us, I'm sure.
Yes.
But, for example, if they could come with a working document for everything that's pretty much complete, and they can, with holes for we need to fill out, still, but we can get working, get using it on the main stuff. Okay, anything else under administration? Finance and budget, Commissioner Zuniga, did you have?
Yeah, what I'll do is give a very high-level summary of our results for the first quarter, and we'll follow up next week with a more detailed report. I meant to do that for this week, but a number of things got in the way of that. But you will remember that we approved a budget for $7,411,000 last at the beginning of this fiscal year. We have had expenditures for the first quarter of the fiscal year 2013 for $1,165,766. And if we were to take the budget that we approved, take out an indirect allocation that the state charges us, and divide by 4, just prorate it, if you will, that number would be $1,684,000, which means that we are underspending, if you will, and I'll get to the reasons why in a minute, just on a purely prorated basis. The reason for that was contemplated. We assumed a number of positions coming into the salary line item somewhere along the fiscal year. Some of whom will be coming shortly, and we've had a lot of discussion as to an executive director first and foremost, and a general counsel, as well as a director of investigations and enforcement. So what I contemplated was those salaries would be at, say, 70% or 50%, because they ramp up towards somewhere in the year. But again, I'll have those.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean that we're not meeting our target.
No,
it just
understand.
means
Right.
that the spending is going to catch up before the end of the year.
Right.
But I'll have an analysis to that effect.
When in your cash flow did you have the research monies being expended?
That's not contemplated in the $7 million figure that I.
Because that's a wash number, yeah.
That's, yeah. We contemplated that as below the line.
Right, okay. Okay, well, that's good news at the moment.
But, yeah, so the good news is we're not overspending, that's for sure.
And the status on the financial services RFI?
Yeah, the
RFP?
RFP for financial services is due October 12th. We've had a couple of questions. They were very administrative. They were administrative in nature, relative to deadline or number of pages. So we answered that, and that's pretty straightforward, and we'll be getting responses on the 12th.
Starting the 12th, which is what, this Friday?
This week.
This Friday, yeah.
Yep.
Great. Okay, anything else on finance and budget? All right, Commissioner Cameron, how would you like to introduce our new director of
I would love
racing?
to do that, Mr. Chair. As you know, you assigned me the responsibility of conducting a search for a racing director. We did conduct a national search, advertised in all of the periodicals and websites that are pertinent to racing. And it is my pleasure to introduce our final candidate for the Director of Racing, and that is Dr. Jennifer Durenberger, who is a doctor of veterinarian medicine as well as a Juris Doctorate. She has national and international experience as a racing regulator, unique skill set, regulatory veterinarian, as well as an accredited steward. Dr. Durenberger first became a regulatory veterinarian in 2003, has worked New York racing at Aqueduct, Belmont, and Saratoga. She introduced many regulatory reforms while on staff, including blood gas testing program, a race day security barn, among numerous other innovative initiatives. Dr. Durenberger also was a veterinarian, regulatory veterinarian in California, horse racing, Hollywood Park, Santa Ana, Fairplex racetracks. Became an accredited steward in 2009, and also was tapped in 2009 to be one of 3 independent veterinarians to join the National Thoroughbred Racetrack Association Safety and Integrity Alliance. And Dr. Durenberger's international experience as a regulatory veterinarian, 3 Breeders' Cups, World Championships, 2005, 2008, and 2009, and she's also operated her own regulatory consulting business known as Racing Matters. Dr. Durenberger, would you like to please come aboard? And you're welcome. Thank you.
Chairman, Commissioners.
Welcome. Well, I guess stay phase one is to decide whether or not we indeed want to hire Dr. Dernberger, right?
I think that would be appropriate after some questions are asked, and my read, Mr. Chair, is that the good doctor is up to the challenge of answering those questions.
Anybody got a starter? Well, let me start. I mean, I'm just interested, you've done this in a lot of places, you've been involved in this business a lot of places. What, off the top of your head, are your reactions to Massachusetts, to what we're doing here, to the, just sort of generally, about the environment, what we're doing here, the reforms that have been proposed, just in general, what's your take on what we're doing here in Massachusetts?
My take on it as an outside observer, and I will say that I haven't had any direct experience with Suffolk or with Plainridge, but I do work on some national committees, and so my reaction is that Massachusetts is proposing some changes and some restructuring at a time that there's a nationwide movement towards uniformity. And so I think that this opportunity that's before you comes at a time that could not be any more apropos. The momentum, we have some really good people, we have some really good model practices, some best practices, some accreditation programs that are out there. And so to the extent the racing side of the Gaming Commission is a little bit different in that it's been in existence. It's an established program in Massachusetts as opposed to gaming, which you're standing up. So we're going to be doing a little bit more realignment, I would think, than standing up the commission. But we've got some good work to do ahead of us, and I'm very excited for the opportunity because I think that the door is open to make some very positive changes and to contribute at a national level as well.
I have a question. I've learned a lot about racing because I knew nothing about racing when I came to this to this position. And but nationally, but this is also true in Massachusetts. It appears that the racing has been in some decline, but in other jurisdictions have had attempts to revive that industry with a number of different approaches, one of which is casinos. So could you just tell us a little bit about that perspective or your opinion about an outlook of the industry, if you will, given its history and given your opinion about the future?
There was a lot of questions in one.
Sorry.
My initial reaction is that racing has been in decline, and I think we all recognize that. I think that the commissioners in all jurisdictions recognize that. And I think that we have more momentum right now and more understanding, and we're working together collaboratively instead of just provincially or state by state to make improvements to the industry. And in terms of working with casinos, that was actually one of the reasons why I went to get my law degree. I continued to work as a regulatory veterinarian while I received that degree, but it became very apparent to me that racing and casinos were going to become more and more intertwined. And at the time when I went for it, I thought this would be a very good area for me to learn and to gain some vocabulary and to understand some issues because it would be helpful down the road. I'm not quite sure how I feel about it, on a personal level, but I think that is where, it's changing the industry. And there are intended consequences and there are unintended consequences, and I think that looking at these things thoughtfully and ahead of time is the way to go.
Well, that'd be interesting to expand on, just the sense of the slight discomfort you have, some of the unintended consequences. I was going to ask you something about that, but maybe you were anticipating that. But what are those? What were you thinking about?
Well, I think it's just venturing into the unknown. Racing, people that are in racing are typically second and third generation horsemen. They've worked in racing all their lives, and it's a very, very important industry to them, and they're very, very passionate about it. And it's basically, it's your entire world. When you work in racing, it is your entire world. And so anytime you look at change in general, whether it's within the industry or bringing something outside the industry in, it can be very intimidating. And so I think that doing it thoughtfully increases your chances of success and increases your chances and your likelihood of not offending the stakeholders, all of the industry stakeholders, because there are a lot of them, from the Commonwealth to the horsemen to the racetrack management.
Interesting.
Well, one of the things that has been a prominent feature of news reports, particularly the New York Times news reports over the last 8 months, has to do with the use of drugs and the health of horses. Could you just give us your take broadly on that? I know that there's many, many layers to that, but just broadly on the issue.
There are many layers to that. Where we were as a racing industry, I would say 10 years ago compared to where we are now, is incredible. It was actually, I believe, right around 2001 when our professional organizations looked at creating some model medication rules and making them a uniform set, because each state was operating independently. And at the time, basically the theory and the attitude was, you know, it'll never happen, there'll never be uniformity. And 10 years later, we're very, very close to being uniform. We're not there entirely, but we've made such huge strides. And I think that the New York Times articles have opened our eyes, maybe given us a little bit more of a sense of urgency to get to that point, particularly with medication regulation. But there's other regulations that affect the safety and welfare of racing's participants. And again, all of racing's participants, from the bettor to the breeder to the jockey to the owner to the trainer and to the racetrack management. A lot of participants in racing that are affected by these regulations.
Somebody else? It appears that one of the potential unintended consequences out of the same set of reports is that the increased purses that has come from racinos and the various interlocking relationships have created an incentive to win, which gives you an incentive to cheat, and that has caused incidents of drugging to go up. Is that one of the unintended consequences that you're thinking about? Have you seen that? Is that something that can be managed?
I don't have any personal experience with that. I actually had left New York prior to the opening of the casino at Aqueduct. I have read the report very closely. And I think that the outcome, the conclusion of the report, and for those of you who don't know what I'm speaking about, Governor in New York convened a task force to look into a rash of breakdowns at Aqueduct that happened this winter. And the conclusions of that report were basically that it's multifactorial. There isn't any one thing that we can point to. And one of the factors that was cited was perhaps that incentivization, as you talked about, creating a financial incentive to put a horse in a race that maybe shouldn't be there. To what extent that what percentage of weight you can attribute to that, I don't know. But the conclusion was that there should be a cap on purse money available at the claiming races. And I think, I'm imagining the number was something like 1.6 times the value of the horse in that race. And that's also been the subject of a white paper that one of the professional organizations, American Association of Equine Practitioners, has come out with a similar number in one of their white papers. So we're looking at it very closely. And I certainly don't think it was the sole contributor, nor did the people on the task force. But it's certainly something that is out there and needs to be looked at.
How did you get into this business?
Honestly.
Yes,
when
honestly. No, make it up. We're all making it up.
That's good.
Honestly, this is absolutely true. I was turning in a final paper when I was a undergraduate student at the University of Minnesota. I was turning in my final paper, and on the bulletin board outside the professor's office was a flyer that said, "Like horses, need a job?" And I said yes, and I said yes. And that job actually turned out to be a sample collector in the test barn, where I got to work very closely with the veterinarians who were there. And they really encouraged me to go this route, and I'm forever indebted to them for better or worse.
If any of our audience doesn't know what a sample collector in a horse barn is, please speak to Commissioner Cameron. She will tell you. Excuse me. Go ahead.
I was just going to mention if you could just give us a little bit more on your take from a legal standpoint. You talk about your degree and then your involvement with best practices across the country. We have as part of our statute, a recommendation to look into any modifications that may be needed to some of the racing statute, if you will. Is there anything you could tell us that you may know already about Massachusetts, or that Massachusetts should look into, that's going on in other jurisdictions?
So there is a set of model rules to regulate racing. It's not just medication, but it's all aspects of racing. It's been promulgated by the Association of Racing Commissioners International, which has stakeholders, various stakeholders, and the rulemaking process has been a number of decades. And they've all had input into those model rules. Massachusetts is not a model rules state, but certainly some of the rules share a common background, a common root, if you will. So it's not divergent 100%, but there are some areas where it's different. And sometimes the unique facts and circumstances in a jurisdiction justify them being different, different variations of those rules. And certainly that's something I would imagine the Commission wants to review. There are accrediting bodies for racing officials. There are accrediting bodies for stewards. The Racing Officials Accreditation Program is a national organization. They actually have some international members. We are working on an accrediting body for veterinarians that's very similar. There is a very new program, a racing certificate program for racing officials such as patrol judges and paddock judges, horse identifiers. That's a 2-day program. So there's a lot going on right now in terms of best practices.
I have a question, Doctor. I've had the most opportunity to get to know you, interviewed you, and actually took a course that you taught up at Saratoga. But I don't think I ever asked you why you were interested in coming to Massachusetts and leading the racing industry.
This is an opportunity for purely selfish reasons, professional development for myself. It's an opportunity to be part of something that on the gaming side is being stood up, and it's a new initiative, and it's very exciting. And I have to say, I've been through a lot of the meetings on the webcast. I've been through the public education forums, and I like what I see. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of this group, of the legislation itself. I'm very mindful of process, and everything that I've seen here is very, very encouraging. I look at it as an opportunity to do some good instead of maintaining the status quo, and here I am.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you.
We delegated to Commissioner Cameron to be the point person on the search, and said to her either bring back multiple candidates if she was undecided, or if she was clear, to bring back a preferred candidate, which she has done. And unless there's further discussion, you might want to make a motion to formalize your judgment.
Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion that we vote on Dr. Durenberger becoming our Director of Racing.
Second?
I enthusiastically second that motion, Mr. Chairman. I've listened to Dr. Durenberger. I had a chance to meet with her briefly before today's meeting. She's thoroughly competent and thoughtful, and I think will be a great asset to this commission.
Any other discussion? I have the same reaction, I will say. I'm delighted to have this happen and to get our commissioner back, so she doesn't have to run the Racing Commission anymore. So if there's no further discussion, I will ask for all in favor of the motion. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Welcome. You got it.
Thank you, Chair.
Great to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, well, one question that you probably won't have the answer to, but do you know anything about the audit that the auditor is doing, Auditor Bump is doing? Do you know what the status, or anybody know what the status of that is?
Well, I know that they've completed their work, but we did not receive a final report yet. Sometimes takes them a long time it takes some time to complete that report. There were no reported incidents during their conversations with the staff at Racing. Do you have anything else to add to that?
I would just characterize that as there were no reported findings.
Findings, okay, thank you.
No reported findings, meaning they didn't find any trouble spots, or they just didn't?
When we met with them was in the kickoff meeting, the message was if there is any findings, you would know as soon as we make those findings.
Findings meaning problems?
Yes.
Right, okay.
incidents. I'm just using a term
Yeah.
of the industry.
Right, okay. Good, because that's one of the many baseline tools that our new director will
Yes.
want at her fingertips to sort of get this thing together.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Doctor. In addition, Mr. Chair, I have some tentative decisions to report to the Commission. On September 20th, on behalf of the Commission, I held adjudicatory proceedings. And the first matter I'd like to report is the matter of Lucy Herkova, a licensed jockey at Suffolk. The Suffolk Downs Board of Stewards made a ruling, and they suspended Ms. Herkova for 15 calendar days, disqualified her for a third-place finish on a race that was held September 1st. And I presided over this proceeding. To get to the finding of fact, the Commission has issued the appellant a license to practice as a jockey. The appellant did participate in the 5th race, taking place on Saturday, September 1st. And the appellant's horse, Katie's Gift, entered the home stretch. After the second turn, it attempted to go around the outside number 5 horse. During this attempt to go around, the appellant's horse impacted the number 6 horse, causing the horse and the rider to fall. The appellant was in control of her horse and could have avoided the collision. Therefore, the collision was caused by recklessness. Discussion on that matter based on the findings of fact, I, in representing the Commission, heard the disciplinary matter and did in fact find that the conduct constituted a violation. Discussion about the matter. The evidence clearly demonstrated that the appellant's horse impacted another. The question here was really rather the collision was caused by the appellant's recklessness, and I concluded that in fact it did on behalf of the Commission. I credit the testimony of Chief Stewart Walsh in explaining and talking about the evidence as we watched the video. The appellant did, on her behalf, talk about a couple of mitigating facts, one being that the horse was tired and it was not accustomed to a 2-turn race, and that it attempted to that she, as the jockey, attempted to overcorrect, and that horses can be, thoroughbred horses can be temperamental. I found Chief Stewart Walsh's testimony to be convincing in this matter, and as a trained jockey, the appellant should have had control over the horse when the accident took place, and that this accident was preventable, and it was careless in nature. The jockey was knocked unconscious, had to go to in an ambulance to the hospital. The other issue at stake here was the amount of time, and again I found Chief Stewart Walsh's testimony that this was a reckless action, and that the 15-day suspension is warranted. The appellant certainly has the right to reconsider to the full Commission on this matter. The second matter is a tentative decision in the matter of Augusto Martin, another licensed jockey at Suffolk Downs. In this particular case, again, September 20th, the hearing was held. The appellant is a licensed jockey, did participate in a 3rd race on Monday, September 10th, and the appellant's horse, the number 2 horse, proceeded during the race to come in close contact with the number 4 horse and, in fact, clipped the heels of that horse. The appellant was in control of the horse and could have avoided the clipping of the heels. We had jurisdiction to hear this matter, and I found on behalf of the Commission that, in fact, a violation did occur. Again, the testimony of the chief steward was convincing, as was the video of the event. The mitigating factor, the jockey testified that there was no intent to clip. Fortunately, there were no accidents in this matter. But I did find, on behalf of the commission, to uphold the Board of Stewards suspending the jockey for 5 calendar days, and the suspension will be served, be determined by the stewards when that will occur. And as in the last case, there is a right to reconsider my tentative decision in this matter. And the third matter, on September 20th, was the matter of a William Beaton, who is a licensed employee, a stable employee. Mr. Beaton appealed his suspension, and this is a lengthy suspension. It's recommended by the Board of Stewards, and this is for 72 days, and this is for the entire end of the meet. This was for a misappropriation of Suffolk Downs property. Again, Chief Steward Walsh testified in this matter. The appellant was backside at Suffolk Downs on Friday, August 10th. There was a rainstorm that caused minor flooding in the barn area, and without permission, the appellant took a tractor, a front-end loader, and decided to take that piece of equipment on his own and attempted to prevent the barn from flooding.
Attempted to prevent his own barn, or the
Well, the barn
track?
is where his horses are and many others, but in an attempt, typically what happens there is they'll dig to try to kind of dam off the area so the water doesn't disturb the horses. But in this particular case, the appellant decided that he would commandeer a tractor to assist in that effort. And it's my finding on behalf of the commission that that is a violation. The facts aren't really in dispute. He admits to operating the heavy equipment without any legal right to do so, and his mitigating testimony was that he was trying to stop the property and the horses from the water that was coming in. Again, Chief Steward Walsh testified that yes, there was a problem with the flooding. It does happen occasionally when rain falls that hard, but that taking that equipment without permission is certainly a problem, certainly a liability issue, and serious enough, in fact, that they recommend suspending for the entire end of the meet, which is October 29th. Again, I found her testimony convincing, laid out the facts, laid out the violations, and it is my tentative decision on behalf of the commission to uphold that suspension. And again, there is a right to reconsider before the entire commission within 30 days. So those are the three matters.
That last one sounds, I don't know enough about it really, obviously, and you presumably do, but sounds like, should he just, was there somebody to call? If it was flooding and somebody had to do something, was there no one around to do it, or do you know what
There's no evidence that he called anyone that was brought into testimony. He admitted he did not have the right to commandeer a tractor from the property. And it's a serious issue, serious liability issues. He has no operator's license or is not an employee. He's a barn employee, not in any way associated with heavy equipment. So like I say, what the other folks do are take shovels and work on that issue. He took matters into his own hands and He was suspended, appropriately so, in my opinion.
Okay.
Please remind me the procedure in which we find ourselves with these
Tentative decisions?
the tentative decisions, yes.
So basically, Commissioner Cameron's decision is filed as of today, becomes official as of today.
Yep.
The party then against whom the decision runs, in this case, Mr. Beaton, would have 30 days to file an appeal with the, whatever issues he wants the full commission to take up. The commission staff responds to that with papers, and then at any time after we get that paper, we then can consider the appeal. And we consider the appeal not with new evidence, but just on the papers and Commissioner Cameron's findings of fact, so.
And is it like in baseball, if while you're appealing, you still play? So or what are these people doing while this is going on? Because that, for example,
Well,
the jockey was September 1st, and
Correct.
it was recommended that
Yes,
she be
and what happens is they, because they plan on appealing, they ask for a stay. If it's appropriate, the stay is granted on behalf of the commission. But once.
But she's been racing up until now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And all these people are still operating up until this
Although
time?
Mr. Beaton has not. His license it's not the same situation with an employee. And
Okay.
so he is not participating at this time.
So if she appealed and it went to the end of the meet, she'd get her 7 days next year. Is that right?
If she appealed
If
that
she-
it went to
if-
the
if
end of the meet.
If the process got elongated until the end of the racing season, so there were no 7 days
Right.
to penalize her, it would start next year presumably, the first 7 days of next
Yeah,
year's meet?
there was no time left in this meet to
Yeah.
serve that amount of time.
I mean,
One's a 5-day versus a 15-day suspension.
This is just one of many things
Yeah.
I've never really thought about, but it's, the issue of, if these are serious things, do they
Well-
continue to operate
Well,
or?
it is because we wait the 30 days, in the past, when there was a racing commission, their decisions would be final that day. But because of our system with one commissioner, that is not the case.
Right.
But they can, if they can, as Commissioner Cameron says, request a stay of execution of the penalty. If she grants it, then they continue to work while the appellate process is going forward. If she denies it, they can appeal that denial to this commission on an emergency basis, and we can override it and stay it. So apparently you did not stay the Beaton suspension for whatever reason. He has the right to appeal that very quickly and come to us, and we have an opportunity to say something different.
This seems like something that's worth thinking about, the processing of this, from the incident to your hearing, to our hearing, to the appeal. I just haven't really thought this through, but it seems like either maybe there's a better way maybe a more expedited way to do it, or maybe there isn't. Maybe there's just, we should be very self-conscious about who continues to be able to operate and who doesn't. Maybe there's some degree of what the offense is that enables you, if it's drugging a horse, if you're being accused of drugging a horse.
There's some, and what we've done, we've been very careful about looking at past practice and being consistent with.
Well, I think we did, I don't know if this is what you were going to talk about, Commissioner, but we did talk about that process already, which is what we have been alluding to some regard, that when we gave Commissioner Cameron when we delegated that position, that appeal process was envisioned, and this is where we find ourselves.
Right. Yes, that's exactly right, and we are operating under, and our regulations basically say that we're operating under a preset set of regulations for dealing with these kinds of issues. There's a formal process and an informal process. We're operating under the formal rules, And these are used by all administrative agencies for all kinds of things. And so there are a set variety of procedures for dealing with all of this. Delay is inherent in the process because you can't have all the steps accomplished the afternoon of the offense. And you need to be fair to people. On the other hand, your suggestion that we look through this and see if there's a better way to do it is always an appropriate thing, and maybe there's some national best practices that we ought to be aware of and follow to modify the existing rules. So.
And it was more, as I said, I hadn't thought about this before until we had this conversation. What I was particularly interested in was, are there issues around the person continuing to do their job during this period or not? And when I asked the question, I didn't even know whether they were able to. Turns out, in most cases, they are.
Yes, there's a stay, so they can
Right.
continue, because we are certainly allowing the due process to
Right.
To work its way out in an equitable manner where people can, until there's been a hearing, they have the ability to continue to work.
How would it work in the case of somebody who drugged a horse, who's accused of drugging a horse?
It's very
Same-
hard to
same-
answer that question without the circumstances.
Yeah.
And when you say drugged a horse, most of our positives are usage issues as opposed to illegal substance. It's a legal substance that the horse was given too much. So those are very different. Can't answer your question
Yeah,
with
okay.
a simple answer, in
Yeah,
other words.
okay.
You have to look at all the circumstances.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's just interesting. I think something that you can keep talking about.
Just a quick question on the first two cases. You had one which was 15-day suspension.
Mhm.
The other one is a 5-day suspension. But it sounded like the second case, where those 5 days are taken, are up to the stewards. Is that the case with the 15-day suspension?
Correct. After the hearing is held, it's up to,
Okay.
yes. And many times after the hearing, what we've had happen on a couple of occasions is the appellant chooses to accept the results and they want to serve their time. So we have come up with a format where they have the ability to waive their right to object and sign a form stating same, and then the penalty takes place without waiting the 30 days. So-
And are they racing days that they're suspended from, or just
Yeah, racing
5
days.
business days?
Racing days that they're suspended from, yes.
I have a question about the third case, and I could look into the packet, but the suspension was 72 days?
The end of the meet, so suspended from the time of the incident through the end of this year because of the significance of the violation.
What was I going to say about this? Oh, now that we have a director, you're going to continue to be the
Yes,
commission.
I have to
hearing-
represent the commission, correct. Yes.
It won't be like the hearing, like the IEB can do hearings, and then you would appeal to us, but.
Well, when we have staff attorneys, and we may want to consider having a staff attorney serve as a hearing officer
Right,
for
okay.
both gaming and racing, that is done in other jurisdictions, but we do not have
Right.
staff to accommodate at
Right.
this point.
So we get you partly back.
Oh, yeah, this is, I
No,
hold
I'm
these
kidding.
once a month,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay. So for the time being, we just continue with this.
correct.
This has probably been discussed, but next week may be too soon, but it would be interesting. We've got this task force that's coming on board to implement these series of reforms that have been proposed. We've got a bunch of personnel issues that are going to have to be made pretty soon, and I think we'd be interested in hearing sort of what your go-forward plan is as soon as you're ready to talk about it. And if that's next week, great, but sometime soon thereafter. Great. Any other racing matters?
That concludes my report, Mr. Chair.
Great. All right, item 7, public education and information. On item A, community and/or developer outreach responses. I did get a letter, I guess this is ombudsman sort of, but anyway, I did get a letter from the president of the Springfield City Council asking whether it was acceptable to us, this is my words, not his, but basically whether it was acceptable to us to have there be a timeline in Springfield which would require someone to give their $400,000 for the Springfield RFP process in advance of the time it was required to put in their $400,000 to us. And the question was, does an arbitrary date established by one community preclude a company from competing for a state casino gaming license in that community when all other communities in said jurisdiction are complying with state requirements? I wasn't exactly sure what he was asking, but I wrote back, if the issue was, does Springfield have the ability to put out the dates with the requirements for people that want to negotiate with them, as they have done, even though there's some sort of a disconnect with our rules, that the answer was yes, that we have decided that the cities and towns are given the authority to set the parameters of their negotiations, subject to the stuff we've already talked to them about. So, long story short, I just reaffirmed that, yes, the deadlines in the Springfield RFP, as we understood them, were within the authority of Springfield as we understood it. So that's just enough. Is that more or less right? Okay. Chelsea, we'll skip to another.
The Chelsea questions, we have one question left. We've revised all the answers, but we have one question left, and that has to do with the apparently orphan community development fund, and whether the comptroller has any knowledge of that. And Commissioner Zuniga is in the process of following up on that. I think we'll be ready to answer all those questions soon. We also have the questions from dealing with the fire and water districts, and whether their interchanges with the developers should be part of the application, or whether the developer has to negotiate separately. We'll have answers to that next week as well. So I think we'll be able to wrap all this up.
Okay, great. And then that'll be something we post eventually.
We post, because that'll be part of the frequently asked questions. And the Chelsea questions in particular deal with a whole range of issues that affect a lot of people, but both sets of questions do.
Right. Okay. The ombudsman issues, the item little I was list of key contacts for applicants. That's something we've talked about. I probably should have taken it off the agenda. But, this is idea of giving people, when they become applicants or when they express interest, that we might refer them to other entities who are involved in things like tourism activities, promoting tourism, promoting sustainability, promoting workforce development, and so forth, that might help them negotiate, package their deals. And I've got a list of some such organizations, and there's something I'm just holding for the ombudsman when he or she comes on board. We had decided not to go forward or not to discuss further the idea, Commissioner Stebbins, of a person to lead the workforce development diversity issue until we had the vendor-supplier meeting. What's the status of that? I forget.
It's two issues, and we'll talk about one of those coming up in the report from our meeting out at Holyoke Community College. We have a date set for a meeting with some statewide interested parties relative to the supplier and diversity working group, kind of get those folks together at kind of the brainstorming level, and then see if that translates down into either a staff person that would be on our payroll, or potentially staff resources from another partner agency that we can maybe support. Thinking about a staff position at this point, I just thought was premature until we get this statewide group together and begin to brainstorm about a program or policy going forward.
Is that, maybe I didn't hear you, is that in the pipeline, that meeting, or that group?
Yes, it's going to be coming up, I think, the first week of November after we get back from Singapore.
Okay. And I've also forgotten what's happened to the host and surrounding community process for getting monies out. Did we talked about that 2 weeks ago? Did we post that? I've forgotten where that stands.
The final
process that we were-
procedure,
Yeah.
the procedure for reimbursement?
Right.
I have not modified the procedure. I can get back to you on that next week.
Okay.
I don't have an
Okay. That's something we want to get posted sometime pretty soon.
Mhm.
Okay. Sorry. Also in your packages, I got a letter from the Pioneer Valley Convention and Visitors Bureau, I guess. Greater Springfield Convention and Visitors Bureau, talking about an RFP that they were talking about putting out, I think this is in the packets, their RTC would like to do a RFP for bidders in Western Mass that would put under writing the plans to stay in touch with the local tourism industry and so forth. And I think maybe Commissioner Stebbins, you know a little bit more about this. They're looking for us to sort of approve this process.
Yeah, this is the process that they shared with us at our meeting out at Western New England College, their outreach to Western New England University. Sorry. This was their proposal to create relationships with some of the potential casino operators in their immediate jurisdiction, which is kind of the three counties along the Connecticut River. And to kind of crystallize and formalize that relationship with an operator should they be a successful licensee. If you get down into the meat of the letter, it says, we hope that the Commission will look favorably upon this RFP process and then consider the strength of a relationship with the local RTC as part of your application or regulatory process. Obviously, I think that's something that will in all likelihood address in the Phase 2 regulations. And I think it's a question we need to actually get our arms around of how do we formalize or give some teeth to MOUs that are created as part of a license applicant's package. Section 18 of our statute, which gives kind of the criteria by which we'll judge a license application, obviously talks about us analyzing partnerships with local and hotels, as well as maximizing regional tourism assets. So, my initial read is that the process is consistent with information that we're going to need to analyze at some point. And I think them putting it in front of us at this time will weigh into our Phase 2 regulatory process going forward. I think it's, Commissioner Zuniga and I met with them early on, and again, they presented at the forum we had in Springfield. I think it's a valuable step. I think it's a thoughtful step, and I think it's proactive on their part to protect the tourism assets of their regional bureau.
I must admit that at one point I was confusing RTCs with RPAs, so that sort of threw me there for a minute. But does it look to you as if the intention here is to look for an MOU with, any and all proposers who present a proposal, all right? Intention is to use the information provided by the proposer as a basis for entering into a non-exclusive MOU with any or all proposers who present a proposal deemed favorable to the RTC, or to the Convention and Tourist Bureau.
Right.
So they're looking to to negotiate with all proposers to make sure that the RTC and its interests are very well represented, and encouraging us to pay attention to that. Okay, got it.
When we met with them, I had the fundamental question that I think is still valid as to how they believe that that this MOU will have teeth, or will really be enforceable. If they get very different MOUs, if you will, or proposals, it's unclear as to how they will implement one or more MOUs. In other words, they seem to be requesting a proposal, and their approach would be to keep it until somebody is selected and then come back to them to say, this is what you proposed. That's on one hand. On another hand, or from another perspective, I feel there ought to be some thought given to coordination. We seem to have now 3 processes, if you will, coming to fruition in Western Mass. If I'm an operator in Western Mass, I'm now a potential bidder, if you will, responding to 3 different timelines, and some of those questions are being asked in same breath in each of those 3 different RFP processes, if you will, with different flavors. The city of Springfield,
Right.
now this convention, and of course, the Gaming Commission.
Right.
So I'd like to give some thought as to whether we, from our position, can have a coordinating role, or whether we should think about what should go in the Phase 2 regulations that we can make public, or not that we don't do anything public, and scratch that notion, that we issue a policy statement, let's say, that helps these groups, like the Convention Center, the Convention Bureau, in what they're trying to accomplish.
I too would like to think about this a little bit more. I share some of Commissioner Zuniga's concerns. The statute says that in the application, there has to be agreements with the host community, the surrounding communities, and the affected business entities. I've forgotten the exact statutory term. Those agreements have to be in existence. The statute also says that in determining, and this is the Section 18 piece, in determining whether to issue a license, we, the Commission, take a look at how each applicant proposes to advance promotion of local businesses and host and surrounding communities, including developing cross-marketing strategies with local restaurants, small businesses, hotels, retail outlets, and impacted live entertainment venues. And we surely should do that, and some of these things at first blush that are contained in the RFP criteria are things that we certainly should take into account. But to put our, and this is only tentative, I really would like to think about this some more, but to put our weight behind a process for requiring prospective applicants to reach an agreement with a specific entity, however noble and good the purpose, it seems to me begins to open up a vast array of different, a potential for a vast array of different entities with which prospective developers are going to have to negotiate and reach agreements, and therefore give veto power to entities that by statute don't have that power. So I think we need to think carefully about the best way to achieve this objective, I think, with which we all agree.
Right.
And think about whether putting our weight behind an RFP process is the right way to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I have real concerns. again, it reminds me of the situation which we consider with Springfield. They want to pick the successful proposer will provide the following. So it's almost like they want to limit it before we've had a chance to review. And frankly, we don't even have our, we haven't even fully formed what we will be looking at. So I have concerns. I know that they're trying to do the right thing, but asking us to look favorably upon this process, I think, is something.
Yeah, this has been really, you've helped, I was feeling uncomfortable with this, but I couldn't articulate why, and you all have done it, so thank you. You said it, I agree, I have that same feeling, you know, there's nothing, if I'm not mistaken, in law that makes the RTCs the arbiter of an applicant's response to Section 18. It's clearly got to respond to Section 18, and we'll figure out whether it's adequate or not, but we don't, you're right. So I guess and I'm thinking out loud here too, so just, I guess if an RTC wants to propose such a thing as this, that's their business, they can do it if they want. But we're contemplating not in any way endorsing that, and certainly not making it a precondition of any kind. Go ahead.
We would be prepared, as we process regulations, to take some of the criteria that they are to consider, whether to include in our regulations as to what has to be shown. Some of the substantive criteria that they propose, their RFP, successful RFP respondents will comply with.
Right. Yeah. So we would agree happily to take into consideration the criteria. Or many of the criteria.
Certainly happily consider them.
Right. But we won't endorse either a specific process or RTCs as any particular formal player in the process. Is that right?
That's my instinct, but as I say, I would like to think about this for a week and perhaps revisit it next week. But that's my instinct. My initial reaction, not my instinct.
Right. Do we, as we think, I agree, let's not do anything dispositive until next week, and maybe after we finish our conversation, I can try to draft a response and see whether that captures where we're going. But would we want to take any proactive role on discouraging such a process, rather than just saying, hands off, you can do whatever you want, but we're looking with interest at your criteria, but we're not going to endorse a process or the RTCs? Do we want to consider any reason to be more proactive than that?
Again, this is my initial reaction, that to try to be more proactive is difficult, because while my view is we don't endorse giving, in effect, a veto power to another group out there, there's nothing to prevent, there's nothing undesirable about groups talking to developers and seeing what kind of an attitude the developer has toward the criteria that the group would like. And that goes true of the problem gambling folks, or tourism folks, or everybody. So that when a hearing on the license comes, they know what their position vis-a-vis the applicant will be. Any sort of proactive discouragement of these kinds of things has perhaps the unintended side effect of shutting down those conversations, which surely would be healthy.
Yeah, I think.
I'd like to mention something for context. When Commissioner Stebbins and I met with this group, the city had not articulated any of, at least not to the commission, their plans for the process that they are now undertaking. In other words, their own RFQ for participants. My question to them now is, and this is perhaps what we should do next in the course of next week, have they approached the mayor of Springfield and the city of Springfield relative to how the city is going to be selecting, what criteria
Yeah, but
they
it's
will
not
be
just
using?
Springfield, it's Springfield, Palmer, whoever else. This has nothing to do with Springfield per se.
It's Greater Springfield, I guess. I don't know
Yeah.
if Palmer is considered Greater Springfield or
Right.
not.
It's part of the Hamden County.
It's not
RTC.
part of Hamden County, okay.
Right.
Well,
But still the same point. I mean, they could, but I think, I agree with your thought on this, Commissioner, that, I mean, in fact, a developer might decide that using an RTC is in fact a well-organized, simple way to get their arms around the tourism industry and would like to use an RTC. That's up for a developer to decide, and if they like the idea, that's fine. So I agree with your thought that being proactive in a negative way is, there's no point in that either. You've been sort of the point person on this. Do you have any more
No,
thoughts or reactions?
Having not reviewed the MOU, I would echo the concern of, we don't want necessarily granting an authority or an entity to kind of self-select out people or discourage the interaction with an RTC. I guess I was looking at it kind of down the road as at some point when we look at an application, a licensee's application, and looking at all the criteria by which we can evaluate somebody. I think having some type of plan that this RFP process tries to get at is, to me, going to be more useful than a developer just saying, checking a box and saying, yes, I plan to work with a local RTC. So I think from that perspective,
Right.
this type of thoughtful planning, I think would bolster an applicant's application. But I'm happy to work with Commissioner McHugh, and let's go back through this and see where it might conflict with our process, and see if we can find a process that I think works for the RTC, works to alleviate some of the concerns that they have about the introduction of gaming in this case into Western Massachusetts. See if we might be able to make some thoughtful suggestions as to how they might change the process. But again, they're looking for some level of confidence that gaming is not going to have a negative impact on it.
Well, I understand that, and that's clearly part of we agree with that, and that's part of our mandate. But the operative sentence in this letter is, I have attached a copy of the RFP for your review and would respectfully ask that your commission look favorably on this process and consider the strength of relationship with the local RTC as part of your application and/or regulatory process for proposed mass gaming establishment developers. I think what I'm taking away from this at the moment is we will definitely say we are committed to the objectives of Section 18 of the enabling legislation, which is to minimize the negatives, and we've certainly expanded that to, be a positive, proactive participant with the local tourism industry. But apropos of their request, we will not take any position pro or con on their process. If they want to do it, it's fine. If they don't want to do it, it's fine. Nor will we take a position on having the RTCs be a formal part of the application at this stage, or regulatory process. At this stage of the game, we're not, that's where we're coming down. We can still work with them, as we would continue to do, to talk about if they want to do an RFP, I'm just stating what I think we've come from, Commissioner. This is not my, I think what we've come to is if they want to do an RFP process, if they think it works for them, fine, that's their business. We're not going to take a position one way or the other on that. We will continue to work with them to think of ways that they can coordinate with the industry, with the gambling industry, to make sure that we implement the intentions of our law. Does that sound right to you, folks?
Yes.
Sounds good.
Did that work for you,
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, so I'll try to draft something. The letter was written to me, so I'll try to draft something. We can look at it next week and make sure that we come to a consensus on this. The other thing was really just FYI. I got a copy of what's called the Certificate of the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs on the Environmental Notification Form. The environmental notification form, in this case, was from the developer and the tribe in Taunton about the fact that they need an economic impact analysis. I don't have the language all here completely straight, but when I first started reading this, I thought the developer submitted an ENF, an environmental notice form, and then I vaguely understand it, and we're going to be briefed on NEPA sometime in the next week or two, but the Secretary of Environmental and Energy responds to that ENF saying, okay, here's what you have to do to have your environmental study done properly. So there's very little, there's almost nothing that takes any kind of positions. They explain the extent to which the developer needs to consider all these various environmental issues, and in some cases says that their scope was too modest and they need to increase their scope and to consider other things. But it's more just, I thought this was going to be getting to be substantive statements. Here's what you can and can't do. But this was really more just structuring their study. I also have understood now from this, which I didn't before, that there's a substantial difference between the MEPA, the Massachusetts Environmental Protection constraints or process, and NEPA, the national, which in the NEPA is broader. And it's the NEPA, and I probably misrepresented this in the past when I've talked to people, it's the federal environmental protection review, analysis, whatever it is, process, that has the broader scope that clearly gets to things like housing and some of the broader impacts. They still, any developer will have to do both processes, have to comply with both processes. But it's not the MEPA process that gets to the very broad view. This is much more formally environmental than kind of broad brush environmental. Anyway, it's kind of interesting background reading, but we do have her. Do you remember when we have the MEPA commissioner coming in sometime within the next week or two? I think.
It's 2 weeks from now.
2 weeks, yeah. Just to make sure we understand what this process is, because it's this, among the central, if not the central, mitigation part of our work. There's also some discussion here about the use of the monies from our community mitigation fund, which is one of the sources that's funded by the tax, and how that monies might be used to mitigate effects anticipated in this study. And I'm not sure, I know so little about this, it's hard for me to articulate this, but I'm hoping that our community mitigation money can be to cover things that fell through the cracks. If it's the bucket of first resort, then there isn't going to be very much to go around. And if in the negotiations with a developer, the local communities and we can get all of the known problems mitigated appropriately, then all the stuff that we didn't anticipate, of which there certainly will be some, we can deal with out of that ongoing bucket of money. But if our bucket of money is set aside as the first place to go, it's going to be gone pretty quick. So that's just something we have to think through pretty carefully. This will be another one to put on our ombudsman's desk so we can get it off ours sometime soon.
Well, on the ombudsman's desk, but also on our own planning
Regs.
desk for what,
Yeah,
regs,
right.
for when we want this kind of a process to start. Because even at a very high level, that demonstrates the complexity of the permitting process that's going to follow. So the notion that we have to think carefully about the relationship between when we issue the license and, given these kinds of planning requirements, when shovels actually are going to go in the ground. and try and figure out how to compress that time to the fullest extent we can. Perhaps by talking about what the application has to say about what they've done in this process. And I'm just thinking out loud here because this is something that we've been talking about since the very beginning.
Right.
But this illustrates how important it is to think about that, just on the timeline basis.
What you're just now saying is really suggests that this is one of those out-of-sequence policy issues that we probably need to look at
Right.
early and
Right.
hard. Yeah, right, I agree with that. Well, that might be a good thing to talk about with the MEPA commissioner,
Right.
our director
Right.
next week, or whenever.
Well, it's especially because the statute speaks to very severe penalties if somebody is awarded a license and does not complete a project, given some schedule.
Right.
And permitting could be, certain aspects of permitting could be a very wild variable
Right.
in completing very early stages of completing a very long schedule. So,
Yeah. That's a big one that we need to talk about pretty soon. Okay. Report from the Director of Communications and Outreach. We didn't mean to have you both here at the same time, but you look like you're ready, so good.
Yeah.
We were going to switch you and Eileen.
Okay, that's fine. All right, so I have representatives here from Jack Rabbit with me, actually, so I just want to stand up. I have Kara Ogar here, who is our project manager, and Lynn Spooner, who is our art director. And basically today, we're just gonna go through a couple of logo concepts for everybody's review. Essentially, and I'll let Kara speak to this as well, but the goal today is to hopefully be able to identify a direction that everybody feels good about. So you'll see 4 different concepts that are very different, however, or they were conceived from the discussions that I had with each of you relative to adjectives and feelings that we were trying to get to and things along those lines. They can certainly be tweaked, here, actually, do you want to have a seat? Is that better? And then the only other thing that I want everybody to keep in mind is that just remember that a logo is part of a larger whole. So at the end of the day, this won't be the solo image that defines us. It will be part of a whole that's going to include websites, brochures, collateral. Now granted, other designs will jump off of this because this is a good starting point, but I just want you to keep in mind that ultimately it's part of a larger whole. So.
Elaine, would you just remind us and the audience of the scope of Jack Rabbit's project?
Sure. So basically, we did an RFP about a month ago that was calling for assistance with logo creation, website creation, and from that all surrounding collateral, such as brochure, HTML newsletter, a website that includes multiple elements from a blog to a community calendar, to all of your basic type of information, several infographics, which will hopefully helpfully define timeline, and we're still sort of working on what those other things will be. So did I miss anything there? I think that's about it. We've done really great with staying on schedule. Jack Rabbit's been extremely responsive, keeping me on schedule for things that I need to be doing. So although today you're seeing the logo, know that we've been concurrent with our efforts on the website. So of all the various aspects that we're working, everything's moving along the track. We're doing as much as we can on the website without having logo approval. So hopefully we'll be able to just keep this moving and stay on track. And Lynn and Carol will explain to you their thought process and artistic reasoning behind the logos. Now, hopefully I'll be able to do this. Hold on. Oh, good. All right, here we go. Let me dim the lights a little bit, ladies. Yes.
Okay, great. So as Elaine mentioned, obviously today we're going to review the initial logo concepts that we've come up with. This is based on a lot of the information that,
Cara,
yes.
just make sure you get the mic.
Oh, I'm
close.
sorry.
Yeah, that's for the webcast.
So prior to actually jumping in and looking at the creative, just to recap a little bit of what brought that about, we had done a creative brief that talked about some of the adjectives that should describe the new logo. Some of the things that came up were authoritative, with integrity, cooperative, forward-thinking, and the other ones that are up there. The most important things for the logo to get across were really expressing how the commission is guiding the development of sophisticated, world-class gaming facilities, uniquely suited to Massachusetts. Also to engender public confidence in the commission and in the process, and to convey a sense of excitement relative to job creation, economic growth, and just gaming overall and what that means for the state. Some of the core values of the commission also went into the concepts that we will be showing. I'm not going to read through these, but
Those are the ones we adopted last week. Right?
yes. And then just some additional information that we had a little bit more specific to what needed to come about in the creative concepts. So the need for an icon and really wanting that iconography to be a powerful part of the logo. The fact that the logo needs to be able to kind of grow with the commission, so we needed to have the ability for a modifier. With the concepts that we show, we're using division of racing, so that's kind of signifying the treatment of the modifier within the logo. For different divisions, that would be swapped out accordingly. We talked about some of the preferred color choices that we should kind of explore and expand upon. We also talked about how the naming should be within the logo. So were we strictly required to use Massachusetts Gaming Commission? Could we try shortening that to Mass Gaming or Mass Gaming Commission? And the concepts will show some different ideas for that. Obviously, the logo needs to be Massachusetts-based, which we all know, but making sure that we weren't specific to one region of Massachusetts. The other thing that we thought of, or that is incorporated in the logos in some ways, are the 5 commissioners, and how you guys make up the Mass Gaming Commission and what that means. So actually, Lynn will jump into the logo concepts and explain the creative behind that. Just to kind of reiterate what Elaine had said, the logo is the foundation for the brand, but there's so many other elements that go into it, so that's just an important thing to keep in mind while we look at these.
Okay, so this is concept 1, and as you can see, we've incorporated the color palette that includes the gold and the navy blue. And below the name Massachusetts Gaming Commission, we're showing how we would incorporate the division of racing or all the other specific divisions that would be included. And this particular concept is interesting because it's inspired by a pattern called guilloche. It's a French term, and you often see this pattern. You can see it around the edge of the circle. It's often seen in banknotes, securities, passports, worldwide. It's something that ties into the whole gaming theme. And we also felt it was a really strong way to communicate the idea of economic growth in Massachusetts and how the Gaming Commission sort of supports that initiative. So that's what inspired the symbol itself.
So those colors aren't very representative. You said navy blue and gold, and that's
right.
Almost brown and black.
Yeah, the projector is distorting the color palette a little bit.
Yeah.
So if you keep in mind that the gold, the way we print your logo, we could actually use a metallic gold ink on different brochures, and that could add that sort of professional and authoritative and professional feeling that you're looking for.
Just saving. We'll pass them back later on.
In the symbol itself, we've incorporated the initials MGC, because out of the creative brief, you did mention that in the future, you wanted to be able to use the icon as a symbol and maybe shorten or drop the Massachusetts Gaming Commission so that it could be more of an icon and really strong in representing the commission.
Was there a reason for the lines above the M and the C?
It's sort of a graphical treatment to highlight the initials. It sort of balances the whole symbol and adds some weight to the center part of the mark, some additional detail. And as you can see, we've used a combination of sans serif and serif fonts, and that is to communicate the diversity of the commission. We're not strictly using a sans serif, which may be considered too informal. We're not strictly using all serif or something that's too formal. So it has that nice balance of both sans serif and serif.
Explain sans serif and serif. I don't think everybody knows.
Okay. Well, Massachusetts is typeset in a sans serif font, and serifs are actually the little, at the end of each letter, there's a little, in Gaming Commission, you can see that is a serif font. It has these little end details at the end of each stroke, and it adds sort of a detail to the typeface that allows your eye to move. A lot of newspapers are typeset in a serif font because it allows your eye to read through it very easily. It leads you from one letter to the next. The sans serif typeface, which Massachusetts is typeset in, and also the Division of Racing, is very good at typesetting smaller font sizes, and it has more of the almost informal and friendly approach. So the balance of the two sort of really work well together. So I just want to go through the key points of this logo, and you can see in the top right corner, that's the primary logo without the Division of Racing attached to it. So that is what you would see when you come to the website. And some of the key characteristics of the symbol are seriousness, authoritative, professional. It suggests expanded economic growth, and also the idea of transparency in the operations.
I think it's best if we go through the 4 concepts. Lynn can walk through them all, and then we can come back and discuss any questions or feedback that you guys have.
So this is logo concept 2. And this symbol is primarily inspired by the idea of taking the government seal or a government logo, similar to the Massachusetts state logo, where it's a circle and all the text and the iconography is contained within the seal. And as far as the way that it's treated, we have mass gaming. That's the primary text that you see when you first look at it. But we've also spelt out the entire name, Massachusetts Gaming Commission, along the outer edges. The 5 stars at the bottom actually represent the 5 equal commissioners that make up the Mass Gaming Commission.
Can we put the middle one in black or something?
Who's that?
The triangle symbols that you see above mass gaming overlap and come together to create the, if you look at it closely, it actually forms an M for Massachusetts in a sort of creative and memorable way. And the reason the triangles were used was because they are seen as the building blocks for many structures, and they are used because of their strength and their ability to support large loads. So there's a lot of thinking and reasoning that went into creating the symbol and how it all ties back into the key characteristics that you want the Mass Gaming Commission to represent. So again, here are some of the key characteristics that I just talked about and the inspiration behind where the logo came from. Here's the third concept. This is inspired by separate objects coming together to form something different and dynamic. It's more of an abstract approach, and as you can see, we're using the gold and the silver that are sort of coming together and overlapping in the center, so that transparency in the artwork sort of is a representation of how the transparency of how the commission operates in a transparency. Again, we're using a combination of serif fonts and sans serif fonts, and gaming is very prominent in the type treatment. And the stacked version of this logo sort of emphasizes its strength and structure, and it has a very powerful upward motion to it that suggests forward thinking and strength, and it has some energy to it with the overlapping pieces sort of interacting and interlocking. So here are some of the key characteristics of this logo. It has sort of a dynamic layout, the way the pieces are interacting and cooperating. It suggests innovation and forward thinking. I think I covered the rest. And this is the fourth and final logo concept that we explored. And this symbol is sort of more on the energetic and dynamic avenue. The way that the motion is sort of uplifting, it suggests innovative, forward-thinking, responsiveness. It also suggests expanded economic growth that is coming from the Gaming Commission. The transparency of the elements in the logo actually relate back to how the commission operates. The symbol is actually inspired by the strong and majestic wings of an eagle. So although it's not a literal representation of the eagle, it does have a lot of the characteristics. And you get that sort of flowing motion, the forward thinking, the responsiveness. So a few things, the typeface, and this one is a classic serif font. It's typeset in all caps and flanked by 2 stars, which is a combination that is very authoritative, dignified, and professional. The color palette includes, again, the navy blue, and the gold, which is accented by a lighter, fresh, vibrant blue.
So that concludes the presentation of the 4 concepts. It would be great if we could circle back and get some initial feedback. As Elaine said from the beginning, we're not expecting you guys to say, we're going with concept X. But what we are expecting is to get your reaction, your thoughts, your likes and dislikes, so that we can go back and, you know, hopefully we do have a solid direction from you guys, and we can make any tweaks or just talk through anything with you guys.
Are those colors more realistic of the real colors?
They are, yes.
So hard to look at that and think
Yeah.
it looks like.
Do you have one with the 4 together, so we can see the 4 at the same time?
No.
Okay.
Well, I have one quick reaction.
Go ahead.
They're great, and they, one of them talks about mass gaming unlike the other 4, and I associate that to have a little bit of a parallel to other state agencies like us, mass housing, mass development, which may or may not be the direction that we want to go.
Right.
I just wanted to kind of make that small point.
Do you want us to be more like the other ones? Is that what you said?
No, it's raising the question.
Should we?
Raising the question.
There's mass pike, mass port, mass housing, mass gaming
Mass
fits
gaming.
that. Is that good or bad, is what he's saying.
Yeah. Is that good or bad? I think
This one says mass gaming.
It helps
Like all
people
the
in the
other-
short form,
Yeah, it's different.
but it may or may not be something that we want to do. But,
Yeah. Well, I'm terrible at this, but
I want to see that one, Steve, the one on the bottom.
But I give you the credit for the really distinctive different styles. They're quite strikingly different messages.
Right.
So,
I have a great affinity for the fourth one. I think that
Me too.
it's the sort of energy that it
Yeah.
contains. It gets out of Mass to Massachusetts.
Mhm.
It's got a lot of energy, it's got a lot of, I didn't realize that was an eagle's wing I was looking at, but it's got a dynamic quality to it that I
Right.
think is
No
really.
ducks.
Yep.
that's it easy. Oh, go ahead, no, that's Enrique.
Yeah, I agree, I like this one a lot.
So,
I like the three colors. I like the racing division, too.
They're all good.
They
They're all
are.
good. But that concept of that.
what do you think about the issue that Enrique raised? Do we like being, eventually, we're gonna be called something by people? And do we like establishing the idea of being mass gaming as similar to so many other things? Or would we rather move towards something else? Anybody have a thought about that?
I think they'll call us whatever, no matter what it says on the logo. I don't
They
think it
call
has to
us
say
what they
mass
don't want.
logo for them to think of us as
We
mass
don't think
gaming.
of that.
Do you know what I mean? You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
right.
I don't think.
We already
I mean,
are.
I don't know. I mean, I think if we were referring to ourselves like mass gaming, we would set a standard for that. It's definitely an interesting thought.
I think if we were going hard with Massachusetts Gaming Commission or it will have a big influence. It may not determine it totally, but,
Right.
and if we did it mass gaming, it'd get picked up like that, because
Yeah.
it's so easy for everybody.
I don't know if I like it, though. Mass gaming.
I kind of like it.
Do you?
Mass gaming, as a shorthand, it tells people something quickly.
Well, there's something to that, it kind of rolls off your
Did you
tongue.
have a preference? Are there two mass gamings?
Well,
There's only one.
Can they
No, one.
can they be
Well,
decoupled?
yeah, you could,
One thing to keep in mind was, for instance, the fourth logo, the symbol that you liked, that sort of had that forward-thinking motion. We could easily change that typography to say mass gaming. So if it's something worth exploring, the combination of the two, that's something we could do too. I don't want to eliminate that idea just because it doesn't
Okay.
spell out mass gaming, because we could explore that option.
what would, I would kind of like to do a little focus group test and ask our audience. Sorry, Commissioner. But let's run through them one by one, and just raise your hand if you prefer it. We'll start with one. No raised hands. Okay.
Thumbprint.
Two.
I like it because it has both the masking and
Okay, so there's, all right, so one interest, yeah. Three.
You know, like,
Wow.
see?
Oh,
Good group. Very good group.
interesting.
All friends of Commissioner Mathieu.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And I mean, and what about, from the color perspective, I mean, and I don't know if I'm right on this or not, but the gold, I mean, I like the idea of having the ability, particularly on a business card or something, to do the gold metallic, like
Yeah.
you said, because I do believe when that's done right,
Right.
it looks great.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
could look really nice.
Yeah.
So I'd just be interested to be able to envision what that could potentially look like for us. But I do like the gold metallic a lot.
I like it too. The gold standard.
I really like these colors. Lynn talked about it in presenting, but I think that the lighter, more modern blue combined with the more conservative navy, just, I don't know, I think it really makes an impact in this logo.
Was there any research done relative to any one of these colors or patterns or fonts already already being in the possession of somebody in the gaming industry or some of our potential operators or anything like that? Did you go through any of that thought process?
You mean, might it look too much like
I
somebody
look
else's
too
logo?
much like somebody else's
Copyright?
in the industry. I'm just curious.
The colors were largely chosen based on
Okay.
sort of individual discussions of what everybody's preference was. So if I can answer for that, that's how the
That's how
colors
we
were
came up with
chosen
it.
anyways.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, there is always the possibility, sometimes happens that you do a logo and all of a sudden it turns out
Inadvertently,
it looks just like one of the bidder's logos. And you might have to rethink, but it sounds like that's not been thought about at this point.
We did take a brief overlook at other gaming commissions just to see what everyone else was doing. That's something that we always do when we start a logo. But as far as an in-depth look and really seeing, every gaming commission in the whole nation, we didn't look at it that in depth. But
Not gaming commissions so much. We were concerned about gaming companies,
right,
not gaming commissions,
Okay.
yeah.
We can do that, we have not.
I don't know, yeah, okay.
I'm not suggesting that that should be the driver. I mean, I like that the driver is organic, shall we say, as opposed to looking at others, but just curious.
Right.
Another thing that we thought was nice about a lot of these too is that they're a lot more contemporary than many of the other
Yeah.
logos that are out there, so that distinguishes us a bit.
We also felt like some of the other logos that were out there, like looking at Nevada's commission logo, which is more like a badge, we wanted to convey authority, but we also wanted to show that friendliness and, not pushing people back necessarily, but more of an open, dynamic design.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got the general feedback that we're talking about, and it sounded like maybe trying this
Yeah.
as it is, but also with mass gaming is something that we're still sort of open-minded on.
Yeah.
And is there anything that you guys can, you can certainly think about this and get back to us with additional feedback, but in exploring this option with mass gaming, is there anything else about this option that you'd like us to explore in terms of tweaks or revisions?
It feels to me like this one, the division of gaming add-on is kind of fits least well, it felt to me, in this one. Kind of looks like a hanging.
Right.
Doesn't look good on a golf shirt?
I mean, I don't know if you could stack it, maybe that's too
Oh,
high,
yes.
or it just looks like it's kind of hanging out there.
Right.
Quite
I
looking
think-
organic.
Yeah.
Depending on the application of the logo, sometimes you won't have enough room to stack all the elements vertically. So you will have a more horizontal version of the logo that, for instance, could be used on the website, and it's more easily readable in a banner, a narrow banner. Or you could have a preferred version where everything is stacked, and that's how, it's always seen that way. It's on all of your business cards. It's always one element. But a lot of companies have slightly different versions of the logos depending on the application that you're using. So we could show you the same logo with the division of racing integrated into the column of text, and that could be your primary logo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because once we move on a logo, we will get with that a style guide, which will provide for us a variety of different ways that the logo can be used. So it won't always look like this exactly, but it will give us, the colors, the type, like you said, what it would look like on a business card, what it looks like on letterhead, what it looks like, when we're using it on a memo, whatever, at the bottom of an email signature, whatever the case may be. But there'll be a variety of approved uses and versions of it.
Keyword approved.
I think, like I said, I'm terrible at this, so let's go ahead.
So, I think, I think we have some direction
I
here.
mean, I think that we're all pretty confident that number 4 is a good option to move forward with. So what I would like to propose is that we take what we've heard today and come up with a second round that addresses the concerns we've talked about and just gives you a little more options so that you're looking at Massachusetts Gaming Commission side by side with mass gaming and can make some decisions from there.
And then, similar to what I did last time, I can go and once you, because I think sometimes with these, you know, even, you know, myself, I think I saw them on Thursday or Friday,
Yeah.
and, you know, needed some time to think on them. You really do, you need some time to sort of digest them.
Can you send us the presentation?
Mhm. And, but, and then this morning, I had some questions about it after I, you know, a couple things came to mind last night. So, you know, so I would suggest, even though we're on a tight timeline, do take a minute, review them again, give it some thought, and then I'll get to you individually, and you can individually provide me some feedback, and then we'll keep pushing this forward, and hopefully come to some conclusions quickly so that we can then start designing everything else, which will take a little bit of time.
I guess the thing that is slightly, I'm slightly feeling is the stars and the swoop. You know, it almost looks like it ought to be the sailing division rather than the gaming division. It's sort of a non sequitur to gaming. You know, there's no real relationship. It kind of doesn't fit. It's an attractive swoop, which I think is what everybody responded to with a wing. But it's kind of like, what does that have to do with anything? You know, and the stars either makes you think of the flag or makes you think of sailing insignias and stuff. So while I think I like the design elements of it the most, whether it's actually right for the racing commission or not, that's what I'm sort of grappling with.
Was there another one that stood out to you?
Well, not particularly. You know, they were sort of neutral. I mean, you can, if you know your thought process, you can see it, but nobody else would look at it, or at least, you know, very few people would look at it and figure out, you know, what the transparency and stuff in the logos that you were talking about. They're just kind of like neutral logos. You know, they're a different thing. This might, I think this Gilouche or whatever it is stuff, you know, might sort of, people might be enough familiar with that to see dollars and financial instruments and so forth. And that's, I don't like the way the M and the G and the C is done, but I kind of like this treatment, this, whatever you call it, this stuff. That relates to us, that looks like bonds and stocks and money.
Right.
And so I'm just kind of groping. This I think is kind of interesting. It kind of looks like a structure and kind of balance, you know, there's kind of interesting. And doesn't look like anything else, whereas this sort of feels to me like it looks like I said, like it ought to be a sailing division or something rather than, so it's just whatever it's worth.
I think that definitely is a good point. What I'd also want everyone to keep in mind is, you know, people aren't looking at logos and analyzing the way you are in the process of coming up with one. And the other context and the other design that's used around things like the business cards, obviously the website as a huge one. So the logo being a piece of that, don't forget that there's other things that can
Right.
happen with the, you know, overall design or the
Right.
whole look and feel of the brand opposed to what just the logo needs to do.
Did you guys have a preference?
It's a good question. We also like the pattern on that first one,
Yeah.
the circle, and how it ties back into economic growth and gaming. And we do like the energy that the fourth one offers, and it is a little bit more abstract. And with an abstract logo, everyone's going to look at it and see something different. So as you mentioned, you sort of see a sailing boat, whereas someone else could see something completely different. They could
Right.
actually see an eagle, or they could see the stripes of a flag. So the abstract approach, it sort of leaves it open to interpretation a little bit more, whereas the first one, there's no interpreting that you need to do. It's sort of a little bit more straightforward.
But I think 1 and 4 were top contenders.
Yes, yes.
Elaine, what did you think?
I'm gonna confuse everybody now.
You had something
I
else?
like 2,
Which was the,
the sail.
The which one? That one there? That one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of like the mass gaming, I like the sale, I like the 5 stars.
Yeah.
What is the sale?
Seal.
The
Seal.
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 I like one as well for the seal nature.
Yeah.
But
Well,
whatever.
you might play with this a little bit. There's a sort of a second view that this one has some interest to people.
So
At
maybe
least-
keeping
At least this
that-
stuff. I mean,
Right.
maybe keep that idea. I mean, maybe let's sort of set up, there's two choices, one that's really representational or abstract, which is the wing, and one that's a little more literal, and maybe try to explore both of them.
And I think if we explore that first option, playing with how we handle the MGC in the center, it seems like that's important. It doesn't seem to be working just as it is
Yeah.
here. So exploring different ways that we could potentially treat that.
Yeah.
I think you could wear it on your shoulder.
Speaking as a colonel, right. Right.
Okay, well, I'll send everybody that, and you can,
Okay.
like I said, take some time, I'll go to you individually and get feedback.
Great, thank you.
Good job,
very
good
much.
job, it was a lot of
Great,
fun.
thank you. Anything else from you to talk about? No?
This is
No.
obviously
Yeah,
taking a lot of my
fine.
time, and then website,
Yeah.
speaking opportunities and things like that, but
Okay.
it's the main stuff.
Great. You started, Commissioner Stebbins, to talk about the workforce development discussion.
Yes, we had Commissioner McHugh and I met out at Holyoke Community College last Tuesday, where we shared a updated draft workforce development plan for the gaming industry. I think it built more upon what we had received from our first meeting where President Messner addressed the commission. This is an updated plan. I think is a lot more thoughtful, has a lot more numbers to it, as well as what I was impressed with was talking about creating this funnel of potential folks to enter the workforce, and how they came to kind of a realization that a number of 30,000 kind of entering the workforce pool was important, as well as understanding that after some preliminary assessments of an individual's experience, as well as their where they are in terms of their skill base, they could be directed off to other available public resources. So just because some meander kind of comes in the funnel, interest in the gaming industry career, doesn't quite match up with some of the basic skill requirements, they could be funneled into other existing public training programs. They've also included, in your packet is the Community College System Casino Career Training Institute kind of draft MOU with a potential developer. Again, these are all in draft form. Their hope is to come to us at a meeting in February and kind of present a finalized plan for us to consider.
I have a question. And maybe this is contemplated here, or is just flexible enough that could be contemplated later. But are the community colleges thinking of different or varying degrees of certification programs or length of certification programs?
I don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head. I
Okay.
honestly have not had a chance to read through the updated draft. But I might suggest if there's a way that we can somehow compile everybody's comments and share that back to President Messner and his team before they come back and see us in November, that would probably be helpful.
Correct. Well, I have two things. I haven't read this thoroughly yet either, but just one important point is the other participants in the process. We've talked about this many times, and I'm sure that, I assume they're probably aware of it by now, but the whole idea of other players that bring other particular things to the table. One is the community action, what are they called? Like ABCD, community, whatever they are, agencies. But when we were in Las Vegas, and we've mentioned this briefly to you, but we went to this facility that Unite Here, this local union basically that has pretty much everybody in the center, in the casinos in it, sponsors with all but one of the strip casinos, which is this training center. And several things were impressive about it. One was that it was a collaboration between management and labor to work together to develop a well-trained workforce that seemed to work remarkably well. It reminded, if we needed reminding, how important it will be to involve the labor unions in these conversations. But it also reinforced the point that came at our, I guess was at our diversity hearing, about the need for other kinds of support than just the classroom experience. And this, right, what we've been referring to as the wraparound, this facility was just remarkable in its ability, in its focus on teaching people how to dress, teaching people how to shake hands, teaching people how to get up in the morning and plan their day, you know, providing second language skills. You know, it was a really comprehensive, thoughtful package of services. One of the things they took pride in was the number of people they had moved from welfare to work. I think they said that this outfit was the most successful in moving welfare to work in the state of Arizona.
Nevada.
Or in Nevada, yeah, right, wherever. So, and I just think we should take that, you know, it's really the combination, all those considerations, the need for other services to targeted, sometimes hard to place groups, the need to collaborate with other providers, particularly with the unions, that was all just, that's really powerful data to feed back into this.
Absolutely. We did raise that question with them. And I think community colleges, from my interaction being on the board in Springfield, was community colleges, I think, over the years have gotten more aggressive in trying to address those wraparound services for single moms, transportation-related challenges, et cetera. To your point, Mr. Chair, about involving some of these other community groups, you know, quickly on page 5 and 6, they do talk about, they realize that community colleges are not up to this task by themselves, and that they lay out who their partners are, and some of those are identified as the community-based organizations, labor unions, and other public and private vendors. So as these regional alliances begin to organize, I think we've encouraged the message to be, you know, let's have everybody at the table who can help us reach the populations of people that we want to make sure have employment opportunities with the introduction of this new industry.
And there's another thing that came from Las Vegas was the understanding that at least in some environments, there can be real meaningful collaboration with the casino operators themselves. And this, I assume that's where this document is coming from.
Yes.
Which, but that was an important, you know, they've already, even here in Massachusetts, I've seen places where they're referring to their workforce training centers and so forth. So they've got their own plans that are underway, which we want to collaborate with as quickly as we can.
Yes. The second half of our meeting,
Before we leave that, could I just
sorry.
raise two questions, two issues? The utilization of others is also laid out at pages 9 and 13, so they do have a really comprehensive thing. But the one thing that it seems to me we need to help them and ourselves grapple with early on is their view that under this program, they would be the exclusive certifying authority. In other words, if people had to be licensed to perform a task, at least on the gaming room floors, the dealers, the other kinds of things, that completion of their program would be an essential prerequisite. And that they view that as a mechanism for keeping at bay the kind of trade school consumer ripoffs, for want of a better word, that are likely, in their view, to proliferate without this, because they anticipate I think the president described it, correct me if I'm wrong, as a large funnel in which you take in 35,000 people, say, to get 10,000 who can proceed through the system and get a gaming license. And with the other 25,000, you divert them into other kinds of things. But if they've had a criminal record or something, they're not going to be able to get a license, so you go through this elaborate program, use these other facilities to help these people, and out the other end come people who really can get a license. But that's expensive and time-consuming, and that in order to make it worthwhile and to make it work, they ought to be the exclusive agents for a program that will lead to a license. Or put the other way around, that a license ought to require in Massachusetts completion of their program as a prerequisite. I think that needs some thinking through at our level as a policy matter before too long, because that raises a whole host of questions, it seems to me, not the least of which is economics. And is this a viable approach? And they have a great program. It's laid out here in really terrific detail, and the organizational efforts they've made to collaborate and then to go to New Jersey and get the curriculum from that school in New Jersey are terrific. Probably and I think the first time they've ever done something like this. So that we really need to encourage that. On the other hand, the exclusivity piece is something we need to think through.
When they talk about the exclusivity piece, are they thinking about every casino employee?
Yeah. No, they're thinking about the casino employees who would have to be licensed. Some of the casino employees, and I've forgotten exactly what the breakdown is, some of the casino employees have to be licensed and others only have to have certificates. And I think the broad division is between gaming room floor operators and hospitality workers, I think. But I may be wrong on that, but so.
We haven't made those
for the
decisions yet, right?
The statute talks about some of that, but we haven't fine-tuned it, that's right. But my recollection was.
Registered versus licensed.
Yeah, that for the license, and it was for the license that
Yes.
their program would be exclusive.
Yeah, the problem with that is many of the casinos are now, they teach on their own.
Right.
So I don't know that it could be exclusive.
And obviously, I think it gets to a point in the training process, and we discussed this issue of at some point that employee is going to need to go through the Ameristar way of doing things, the MGM way of doing things. And do we have a program that will bring people up to a base set of skills that the industry accepts before they kind of go off and, again, learn how to do it that one operator's particular way?
At the diversity program, building on that, the person who the presenter, I've forgotten her name now, who was the former employee of the gaming facility, made exactly that point, I think, that the interface between the casino operator and a program like this is that the program like this brings people up to a base level, then the refinement occurs at the casino training program. I mean, that's one model. There's obviously other models of doing it, another of which you saw in Las Vegas.
Well, I think I agree with you. That's one of those out-of-sequence topics too, I think. So,
Right.
Let's join this again next week. We'll get our comments back to Commissioner Stebbins, but maybe have thought about this a little bit more for next week and see whether we're ready to start thinking about does this, because this is a fairly, as you say, this is a pretty significant issue.
Right.
The second portion of our meeting was with respect to the construction trade, the temporary jobs that will come with licensing of casinos. In appropriate to be in Western Mass because we've been approached by a number of union leaders out there talking about their concern of, because a casino in Western Mass has the potential to be the largest construction project in Western Mass history, I guess, on beating out the most recent project by almost fourfold in terms of size of investment. They're concerned that because there is not a contractor in Western Mass probably capable of doing a project this size, an operator would have to look outside of the region. A lot of those contractors already have their own teams. They come in and some of the spare remaining vacancies or opportunities are then provided to the local union. So I think we have Mr. Duran's testimonies with the New England Regional Council of Carpenters. We also had a good overview of the topic from Frank Callahan from the Mass Building Trades Council, who came out to Holyoke as well. So an informative session. I mean, Mr. Grant's testimony that he provided, you know, essentially poses the question to us at the end of his testimony, saying, would you seriously consider setting a minimum percentage of 50% local residents, employees on a project in Western Massachusetts? Certainly an issue that warrants some discussion. You know, some of my initial thoughts are: is this something that potentially a host community agreement gets to the point? Because I think it would, in some respects, create a discrepancy for the commission, because we probably don't see that same issue raising its head in the Eastern Massachusetts region. Would we want to kind of change up our regulations as it just pertains to Western Massachusetts? I don't know the answer to that, but that was the genesis of his question at the end of his testimony.
Well, more to that point, some Eastern Massachusetts cities and towns do have ordinances for local residency requirements.
For contractors?
Yeah, for contractors, local hiring. Boston has one, Revere has one.
I certainly don't.
Others have one.
Not only do I not see any problem with the local communities making that one of their negotiating points, but I think I at least have mentioned that to them. That is no reason on earth, particularly in Western Mass, where that shouldn't be one of the terms that they try to negotiate into the deal. And so, and I think I've said that to the unions as well. You know, you should don't just start with us. Start with the host communities.
Yeah, their point was that there have been efforts before in terms of goals, but the goals tended to slide because they were aspirational, not contractual requirements. And that somehow there had to be contractual requirements. The host community or surrounding community agreements could have those pieces in them. But then we would probably have to somehow, by adopting those agreements, we would put our weight behind it.
Right.
So, yeah.
And that's true. And a lot of people say to us, make sure that not only do you get these agreements up front, but you have some kind of enforcements and clawbacks and so forth.
By the way, just a minor point of clarification, those local residence requirements are for public works projects, so may or may not apply for a casino.
Right, we passed one in Springfield, was particular for public projects.
For public projects,
right.
But overall, I think on this last subject, was kind of an eye-opener, was getting our introduction to the types of facilities that the unions operate around the Commonwealth to, get apprentices, get young people into the trades. Obviously, if you're in the trades, your probably work career timeline is shortened somewhat if you're lugging 80-pound bags around most of your life. My question to Mr. Grant is, if this is going to be the as it pertains to Western Massachusetts, it's going to be the biggest project in Western Mass. Why wouldn't you be looking at this as a great kind of recruiting opportunity, as well as giving your apprentice program or apprentices a chance to work on a project of this size? And it just would bolster their opportunity to recruit people, as well as give some great on-the-job training experience to their apprentices.
Did he agree with that? What was his response?
He did agree with it. I think they are, again, they invited us to even come out and visit some of their training facilities, get a sense of what they put their apprentices through, as well as Mr. Callahan gave a great overview of how long it takes for an individual to go through an apprentice program until they come out a journeyman on the other side.
Yeah, good. Great, okay, thank you. The AIA presentation, I think that's scheduled, right? Or that, no, it's happening, right, it is
It's
scheduled.
happening.
Scheduled that.
Great.
Come on up.
Welcome. Introduce yourselves, and you might want to remind everybody how this came about.
Sure. So, let me start. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
My name is John Nunnery, and I'm the Executive Director of AIA Massachusetts, American Institute of Architects. And we want to thank you for the opportunity to come before you to talk about the proposal that we put forward for an educational forum to start looking at the issues of physical planning and design of these casinos, specifically design of casinos that will eventually be built in both suburban and urban environments and what they might look like. I'd like to tell you a little bit about who AIA is and then introduce the three members that I brought with me. AIA is a national trade organization that represents architects. It's based in Washington, D.C. Every state has a chapter, and under these state chapters are the local chapters, or the local components. Here in Massachusetts, we have three local components, which break down into the regions of the state. Eastern, which is represented by the Boston Society of Architects. We have a Central Mass chapter and a Western Mass chapter. I'd like to introduce, given that context, Vernon Woodworth, who is an architect and is the president of AIA Massachusetts. I'll start with Laura first, who's the president of the Boston Society of Architects, which again is our Eastern Mass chapter, and at last count, I believe, is still the largest local component in the country. And Mike Davis, who is our president-elect. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Laura to start with, and she'll kind of walk you through the beginnings, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, John, and thank you for having us here. We have been reviewing the Enabling Act language, and we think that there's some areas where the architects of the Commonwealth might be of assistance, specifically in Sections 5 and Sections 18. Under Section 5, it talks about evaluation of architectural design and concept excellence, integration into surroundings, and tourism appeal. Under Section 18, it talks about utilizing sustainable design principles, meeting or exceeding stretch code, committing to advanced energy efficiency, conserving water and managing stormwater, and procurement or generation of renewable energy. We think that the architects of the Commonwealth are uniquely positioned to assist the Commission in developing the criteria around these issues. The memberships of the boards of Mass AIA and the Boston Society of Architects have a draft position paper, which we believe start to look at these criteria, so we would like to talk to you about that and how we would proceed, our thoughts about how we might be able to assist you.
So in particular regarding the sustainable design principles, this is something that we feel we have an expertise that we can share. It's, in terms of public policy issues, the top priority, I would say, of the AIA Massachusetts. And I think with the proliferation of gaming in general, this is an opportunity for Massachusetts to distinguish ourselves in terms of the type of buildings that are built under this commission. So beyond the LEED program, which is mentioned in the criteria in the statute, we have many specific suggestions that we'd love the opportunity to get into. We'd also are very interested in strengthening local communities with the development. Smart growth is another priority of our organization, and the opportunity to limit vehicle trips and to make for a community process that strengthens local organizations and businesses seems like a top priority. And as part of that, we'd like to convene a discussion group, which I think Mike is going to talk to you more about.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. We appreciate this time. I'd like to quote Dr. Durenberger and say we too want to do good and contribute to the thoughtful process you've undertaken. We're the architects, and we're here to help. Here's the proposal. First is that the white paper that we've submitted, the position paper we've submitted, is written largely by us. We're the leadership of the two chapters, and we think that we would like to take upon us opening up this conversation up to the design community at large. So we are proposing to host an open forum, a one-half-day symposium for any architects interested in the design of casinos in the Commonwealth. We could invite our allied associations or organizations, the engineers, site and civil engineers, mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers, life safety experts, and put a forum together. The commission would, of course, be welcome to attend if you'd like. It's probably longer than this meeting, so I wouldn't recommend it. But from that forum, we'll distill.
Maybe more interesting.
Maybe we would distill specific recommendations to come back to you with, and the recommendations are they can be, you can think of them as two piles of recommendations. The qualitative recommendations, like what exactly do we mean when we say integrate design with the community? What exactly does it look like? What does design excellence look like? How do we measure it? I think we could give you some specific criteria for that. We also may throw some of our own recommendations at you. % of site area devoted to open public space, for example. The presence of the public way in the development, so they don't feel insulated and cut off from the rest of the community. And then there's the qualitative criteria that we're also able to help you with. Things like Massachusetts LEED has its own LEED standards, Mass LEED Plus. When it was adopted, it was cutting edge. Now it's a little out of date, so we could look at the criteria for you, revise Mass LEED Plus, integrate some of the more progressive building energy use standards that have arrived since then, create metrics for building energy use that you could use, the energy use intensity metrics that are used in evaluating high-performing building now. We could say, do we want to be a net zero energy building? How close to net zero do you think we could get? And we can wrap all these criteria at the results of this one large open forum into a package of recommendations, come back to the commission and say these are our suggestions for how you approach these design criteria coming from the architects of the Commonwealth. And that's the pitch. And please don't ask us to comment on the logos.
You already did. Yeah, we had at least 3 eagle votes.
Flags, they're flags.
Flags.
You're being a very mindful client, and as we hadn't received the brief for the design of the logos, we don't feel really qualified to comment on it.
I have a question on the last point that you made, which is something that has been asked, at least of me, in one of the speaker engagements that we have made, and that's the design criteria. And how are you at least thinking about this commission could be in terms of level of prescriptive or prescription, if that's the right word, relative to that design criteria?
Right.
Broad, focus, specific in certain areas. Do you have some general thoughts? And of course, the
Yes.
forum could address much of that.
I think we could get I would like to see us get as specific as we can and be as prescriptive as we can. Not to say here's what it should look like, but to say here are the design criteria that we have for it. Specific things like complexity, numbers of materials, different selections of materials, relationship how to the context in terms of scale and form, or in terms of language. Maybe yes on this, maybe no on this, but in written in plain, in simple terms, so that hopefully you wouldn't have to. I mean, we would also be happy to serve as in a design advisory capacity if required, if requested by the commission, but hopefully leave you with some criteria that are specific enough so that you can apply them, but not prohibitively. for example, we would never say, please only use brick, in the commission. But we may say, a large, a presence of regional materials that come from from local manufacturer that relate somehow to the historic context or the contemporary context in an urban sense. I think that's the kind of language we would give you.
I think we see this as an opportunity to create a real model that the state of Massachusetts should be setting very high standards that other states will be following, so that obviously in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of community context, and in terms of the quality of the overall design of the building. So we would very much like to have, be able to bring to you some thoughts on the nature of the design and the quality of the product you should be getting.
Yeah, exactly. We would like to think that if the proponent came forward with a proposal for a design that said, I saw this Rocky Mountain, lodge, and that's why I wanted to make the building look like a Rocky Mountain lodge, and we would give you enough material to say, well, here's why it shouldn't look like a Rocky Mountain lodge, because it doesn't meet these design criteria that we've got, in place already.
Have you seen design criteria of that type applied to other projects in other places? I.e., some kind of a licensing body, I guess, or even a town having planning board regulations that incorporated the kinds of design criteria that you're talking about for any building in the town.
Municipalities can be very specific about what they want to see. The historical character, materials, yet materials you can use, materials you can't use, signage approaches, lighting approaches, pavement, streetscape plan. They could be very, very specific. I think as the agencies get larger, broader, more public, they tend to be less specific. So I think we certainly wouldn't want to overstep. We wouldn't want you to overstep your bounds, but I think it would be incumbent on us to make, again, we would all like to see these buildings look like they belong in Massachusetts and they come from Massachusetts. We're designed with our state in mind. So however best we can help you ascertain that, I think it's we feel an obligation to help you with that.
And we're not trying to provide a specific look. I don't think that's
Right,
anybody's
right,
intent.
right. No, I understand that. And there is the leads piece, for example, the leads type piece pertains to something that is severable from whether you use local materials or build it like a Rocky Mountain lodge, right?
Yeah, the aesthetics are not a part of LEED.
Right.
The language of the architecture
Right.
is not part of it.
So there are a whole bunch of design criteria that are independent of look.
Yes.
And those would be included in this. They would
Exactly.
be sustainable, renewable.
Performance criteria.
Performance
Right.
based.
Yes.
And then there would be, look based, what?
Aesthetics. yeah.
Aesthetic.
Mhm.
And again, I don't think we're trying to codify or to set up a specific aesthetics, but how do you make sure that the building is designed so it fits in with the context? How do you make sure that we're not just allowing design of boxes, that where all the activity is done in dark and they're cut off from the community? These should be assets to their communities, and not just obviously during the construction process, but for years to come.
And healthy buildings.
And what?
Healthy in terms of.
I think, my sense is that we ask you to come here because we're very predisposed towards having some such forum. The question is, what format should that be? You proposed something that I hadn't anticipated, and what all should be included in it. As Commissioner McHugh is saying, what they proposed was something different from what we've done in the past. We've had a forum that was an educational forum for us, and then we said, but through us, let's let this go to the public as well. You're talking about having a process where you all would try to synthesize ultimately, you have your own initial process, and you would try to synthesize that into some kind of usable form for us.
Well, we could represent that to you as an educational forum.
And we'd be open to doing it either way.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, which does one.
We're trying to save you a little bit of effort, but
Yeah.
I think it'd be.
Well, certainly, whether we have it as a formal forum of the commission or not, it wouldn't surprise me that one or more of us might want to go to some or all of that anyway, so we can always do that.
Right.
Does anybody have any strong feelings?
I feel I should mention, for reference and an important context, that I'm familiar with the work of Laura, her colleagues, others at the Boston Society of Architects. When the School Building Authority, where I was part of, first got its start, they not the similar process, but they got together, thought a lot about the new legislation and the fact that the authority was going to be issuing regulations, and provided a lot of very useful recommendations for that agency. What I'm hearing is a little bit like that, but of course,
A little bit more specific.
a little bit more specific. But in the context of reaching out to the membership as to just brainstorm for good ideas, which, you know, I think would be a great asset for us.
I think it's also important to remember, though, that this, again, this is the opening of the dialogue. We know you have questions. We've proposed a forum that slightly is a little more internal looking in terms of we're getting our folks together. But this can be a public forum to address whatever you're thinking of, whatever questions you have that you're hoping to find some answers to. So I don't think any of us here are actually set in stone as to what exactly this educational forum would be. We just think it's an educational forum on the issues of design, and whatever it finally turns out to be is what it will turn out to be. It'll be something that's agreed to by all of us. So I think that's the important thing to remember here.
This is really intriguing, because a part of the statute, as you undoubtedly know, is that these buildings have to comply with local zoning codes and ordinances, so that we don't have just a free hand to say, you're gonna do this or that. But suppose we had a forum that was designed to alert the local authorities, as well as us, about the kinds of goals and aspirations we ought to have for these buildings. Not sort of a discussion, not a discussion, although that would be fine too, not a discussion that was internal to the architectural community and engineering community, but an expression of criteria that communities could look at, because they too are going to have a role in deciding what they require in their host community agreements and who they want to move forward for, and they ought to have some of these ideas in mind as well. That might be a hugely helpful program, and one that made a lot of this accessible, and helped to focus it and achieve buy-in to it in a way that ultimately we wouldn't have the authority to do.
Well, it might help you with one of the items that was on your agenda that you were discussing previously, which was I think it was the tourism councils. Not to say that we have any particular thoughts on tourism councils, but it seemed as though the issue you were grappling with was they're envisioning a process that's somehow they're going out and talking to these casino developers, maybe before you, and trying to act as maybe a clearinghouse, and you're grappling with this idea of should they be there, should they not be there. What I think we're talking about is an overall design process, and there's a potential in this forum to maybe help you form a process that you can use with both the communities and the gaming commission for them to go through to say, look, if you are a community that's looking at building a casino, well, we at least have a general framework to start from in terms of who you want to talk to, what a design process might be to help you determine, is this really a responsive proposal to this community or not? If you look at it from the larger context, granted, we don't want to get too far off in our thoughts, but this forum could help you look at some of those issues.
So in a sense, this helps establish some kind of model guidelines, and then you can share the model guidelines with the local communities as a format for them to build from, a structure, a foundation for them to build from.
Right, a broad set of objectives for the designs, and then a review process, a model review process. Yeah, that would work.
Tell me if, perhaps if we could speak up a little bit about a couple of relevant examples to those guidelines, and tell me if this would be one, just the life of a building. If somebody designs a 30-year building as opposed to a 50-year building, that's very different when it comes to actually, quantity, for example, quality. Is that one that you mean, for example, and are there others that could also help us sort of think through more about this?
Yeah, I think durability is certainly one that you'd expect to see. I think in terms of, there is a lot of things related to LEED, or the foundation that LEED provides, not only energy efficiency, but also things like light and views. Often casinos are closed off from the exterior world. We would provide suggestions for how you might provide more connection to the natural world, so you're not providing a closed-off environment, and that also, again, has implications for the community around it. So those are a couple of things. I think the energy-related ones are a little bit more quantitative and easier in a sense to develop. You very quickly get into on the edge of more qualitative criteria, and those can be a little bit more sensitive. But I think having a durable, having appropriate relationship to the context, to the community that it's in, having the appropriate levels of transparency, both kind of conceptually and reality. I think those are some of the things that I've been thinking about.
I think to pick up on something from your former employer, one of the things the MSBA did, and I'm not suggesting that we take on what I'm not suggesting literally, but the MSBA put forward space standards that needed to be followed. I'm not suggesting that the commission come up with space standards for casinos, but you might consider thinking about things like, what you probably don't want is a casino coming in saying, well, we're going to put our $500 million of construction into one big gaming floor, and that's it, because you didn't tell them to do anything other than that. So space standards, or establishing some type of standards that, well, fine, we're not telling you how to build it, but maybe you don't want to see more than 75% of the overall construction cost being spent on just the gaming floor. Things like that, things that your former agency thought about. Those are the things that I think we might be able to help you, maybe not put dotting the i's and crossing the t's, but help you think of general guidelines around it.
I think it would be helpful for us to think about how far in the future you want the performance criteria to be projected for the facility. Is this a 10-year horizon, a 20-year horizon, a 30-year horizon? I mean, a life cycle cost analysis, unfortunately, these days is more often than not just a payback analysis. You know, if I add this PVs and I generate this amount of power, and it'll pay for itself in 5 years. You know, I think, but if to say, what do you project for us 30 years of operating expenses, you know, including maintenance costs, including depreciation costs, you know, so we can see that this project is going to endure and be productive for 30 years, 40 years. I think that's something that we could really think about including.
It's something I'm just kind of getting my hands around, is that it seems in other jurisdictions where you have these large scale developments go up, there is a constant reinvestment, probably more than the life of the building and the market would dictate, of I got to keep it fresh, I got to keep it new, especially if I'm looking to attract a number of people. I had a question relative to, I don't know very much about the Green Communities Act or program in Massachusetts, but from what I've read, Springfield, Palmer, Boston have all adopted the Green Communities areas. Just basically, what does that translate into when it comes to commercial development, and certainly commercial development of this size?
Well, the one piece is the stretch code, which at the current time requires 20% improvement over the base code in terms of energy efficiency.
Okay.
That is about to change. We're adopting a new energy code within the next 12 months, which actually is identical to the stretch code. So the question as to what the next stretch code will achieve remains open, but that's the expected intent, that it will continue to drive energy efficiency beyond the base code. There are 4 other criteria or 5 other criteria of a green community.
Yeah, but the stretch code is the only one that's actually impacts
that's
buildings.
the key.
Yeah, it's expedite permitting for renewable energy distribution sites, energy use master plan for the community, that sort of thing. Purchasing, green power purchase agreement, but the one that really affects buildings is the stretch code.
Well, let's try to hone in on the format idea. I like the format that we've had in the sense of us getting, hearing a whole range of stuff. But the way we've done it in the past is we've put together panels which have addressed various things. That's certainly not locked in stone as far as I'm concerned. You know, you could have whatever. I mean, it could be an open process where people can come and speak to a mic, or you guys could. But I think I sort of like the idea of having us be there. There may still be, there are two things that could happen. You could do something before it if you wanted to do some vetting or organizing, A, and B, you could certainly, and I would like it if you would synthesize stuff later on and summarize it into some recommendations, because the first part would be a little more free-flowing. All of ours have been.
Right.
But I think personally, I would rather have us be there at a fairly early stage. So if you could take it from that and figure out what's an appropriate agenda.
What's the typical time investment for the commission on it?
Well, we've done everything from 2 days to half a day. So, I mean, I think this is an important one. There are three things that I think we've mostly talked about, the whole range of proposed regs and standards and so forth that you could help us think about, and that's definitely would be a big piece of it. But you heard us talking about what are policy decisions that we ought to be making soon, so the developers know earlier on than when our regs are published in who knows how long from now. And you might be thinking, that would be another topic, that if you could help us think about things in your area that we really need to get out onto the table soon, to be fair to the developers. And then the third thing is, we have only talked a little bit about what we're going to do for an evaluation process when these proposals are made.
Right.
And many of the same kinds of standards, same kinds of criteria you're talking about, we may well want help in making those evaluations or assessments once the final proposals come in.
Right.
So speaking about the evaluation process too would be a third thing that I think we would find valuable. That's not as time sensitive. Let's do that later. But
yeah, Mr. Commissioner, how does this need for help fall within that 90-day window period of the RFPA issuance and the due date? Is something you need? Is this not related to that schedule?
No, it's
No,
not.
okay.
The only it's related to is that developers are out there working now. They're talking with communities.
Understood.
At least 2 of them have already put designs out. You know, now they're on their own risk, and they didn't have to do that. But the ball is moving quickly, and out of fairness to everybody, we want to get any substantial parameters that they're going to need to operate within. We want to get to them as quickly as we can.
Absolutely, understood.
Well, let me just make a point of clarification that dovetails into the notion of evaluation as well. They have put out renderings, and they may or may not have a full design behind their proposals. We don't know. And part of that is, and this is something that really needs to be fleshed out, hopefully, throughout this process, but especially at the forum, is how to evaluate the evaluation against some criteria may have to happen, correct me if I'm wrong, a little bit later after our award of a license. Because people may come with not full designs, certainly not construction drawings, for us to evaluate or for us to be advised and evaluate a proposal. But the devil is in the details once you really start putting, choosing materials, fine-tuning the schematic drawings. Am I not correct?
Yes.
Could you expound on that
Correct.
notion?
Yeah, Mr. Commissioner, I'm actually, in full disclosure, I'm the chair of the Boston Civic Design Commission for the BRA, and we frequently see projects that come to us that look like they're done, and we have some objective design criteria that we think that the team should consider, and they, lo and behold, they're not actually done. They go back to the drawing board, they meet with the design team, they come back, and the design evolves in dialogue with the commission. So, I mean, the sooner, I would agree with Chairman Crosby, the sooner you can get criteria to the development community, the easier it will be for them to understand your intent and comply with what you want, what you think the design should do. But in the absence of that kind of timing, then, this entity has been designated. We want you to work with these criteria and see how close we can come to, to achieving the goals that we've set for you within reasonable parameters. And it becomes just part of a conversation between the commission and the proponents.
So just let me pursue one thing. What's your relationship with the BRA? Say again.
I'm chair of the Boston Civic Design Commission. we advise, I'm an architect, I'm an architect.
Right,
in
I know
private
that. But
practice.
are you appointed, who are you appointed by?
Appointed by the mayor, yeah.
That's something we might need to think about, because we don't want somebody advising us on criteria who's affiliated with the mayor, who's got a horse in the race, so to speak. So,
I could recuse myself if it pleased the commission.
yeah, that's just something I appreciate knowing about it. Those are the kinds of things we have to be really, and anybody else who's involved should have the same kind of sensitivities. And it's just both the reality of conflicts, the appearance of conflicts, both are something we need to be really sensitive about. So
Understood.
We'll think that one through. Sorry, you were going to ask.
No, it may be a situation where you have different regional teams focused on, projects in other regions. As I was perusing the Global Gaming Expo agenda in Las Vegas earlier this month, there was a whole series on casino design, which I think because we attended, we'll have access to the videos of those panels, which I'll try to find a way to share with you if at all possible.
Well, I think we have a clear consensus, we'd like to do this. If does everybody, we sort of okay that we'd like to be there fairly early in the process, and so to have the primary focus be something that would be a presentation to the commissioners.
Great.
The particulars of that and what precedes it and follows it is yet for you guys to work out. And Janice Riley, you can coordinate with on dates when you're ready to be thinking about our chief of staff.
So we'll put together kind of a concept of how we would suggest it being done.
Right. And send it to Janice.
Balls in our court.
And we'll take a look at it, yeah.
Thank
But
you.
it's very exciting, and it's really important stuff, and we're
Thank you.
really pleased to have your willingness to help out.
Glad to be here. Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are just about done. On the research agenda, a couple of things. The sort of principal closing date for the request for information on the research plan was Monday, I guess. And we have begun to, we've got at least 4, maybe 5 RFAs, which we're now looking at, and we'll think about a process about how to follow up as soon as we can. Anything else on?
No, there's, 5.
Yeah,
We got 5 responses.
Okay, great. Very interesting stuff, by the
Very
way,
good.
when you,
Really?
when you, this is it's a big, interesting, exciting project, and these are people who are responding that really know a lot about this stuff and about the methodology of research, and it's really interesting. The last thing, I think, is the proposed draft letter. This came up at our meeting that we held in Springfield. The Partners for a Healthier Community asked us to be a partner with them in their application to the Pew Health Organization, Health Group, to be a part of their application for a health impacts assessment. We heard Mr. Robinson talk about it at the meeting, and we said 2 things. One, we'd like to talk to Pew about our research project, which, by the way, I've started, and they're very interested in what we're doing and are going to talk with their peers in this Pew Health group about whether or not they might want to collaborate with us in a big way. So we follow through on that, but we've also told Health Partners that Partners for a Healthier Community, that independent of that, we would most surely be willing to be a partner, which commits us to not very much. But the letter that you have here is proposed for our signature, for, I guess, my signature, but for our endorsement. And I think it looks fine. Did anybody else have any?
No, I thought it looked great.
Yeah.
That's great, good direction to go in. I thought that letter does.
Right, okay, so I'll just go ahead, I don't think I need a vote to move forward on this. Anything else on research? Anything else on other business? Anything else on anything? All right.
How about a motion to adjourn?
I got it. Commissioner McHugh has been champing the bit here for quite a while. Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.